Welcome to the Jamal This Morning Show. There we are. Welcome to the show. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm glad that you guys can join me this morning. I hope you guys can hear me all right. There's no weirdness with sound, no distortion, or anything like that. Just want to make sure. Okay, that's way too loud. Okay, we're going to go with this, and hopefully this sounds perfectly fine. I hope you guys are doing all right this morning. I'm here. I hope you guys are decent. It is an early morning. Um, was not able to be here yesterday, and there's big news that took place yesterday. Of course, there were the negotiations. Yes, I'm well. I'm here. I'm settled. I'm going to be here for the next 2 months. And so I am safe and comfortable. Let's put it that way. And it is good that I'm here for 2 months. I hate this notion of hopping month to month to month. That sucks. And so I will be flying to win for as long as I need to be flying to win. And I will be content and I will not think too much about it. But I hope you guys are doing well. Big news. So Mark is going to be here at 8 o'clock. Apologies for the lighting. I'm going to have to get a light. My light blew out last night when I did my systems check. The light said, screw it. And I've never heard a light sizzle and pop and blow out. Last night was my first experience. But that's okay. We're still going to do the show. I'll go out today and try to find somewhere that may have a light store or something like that in order to replace the light. But beyond that, really good show for you today. Kit Clarenberg is going to be here first thing this morning. Mark Sloboda is going to be here a little bit later. And beyond that, we have KJ. No, KJ is a favorite, and I've had some fantastic conversations with KJ. And so I am looking forward to being able to speak with him. But the thing that is the big news has to be the conversations that were taking place between Russia and the United States. Ukraine was there, but they were there more in a capacity to, okay, they said what? They said what? Best they got. Best they got, right? So in the context of those negotiations, they flailed out, and in flailing out, I have not heard an official statement yet, meaning there's been no official communique from these statements, which is a bit strange. And maybe it's not a bit strange, and maybe I suspect what it means is that they were not able to come to any conclusions. Now, the conversations were supposed to take place primarily on the black grain deal. That is the deal that fell apart because Ukraine was smuggling weapons and everything else. And Russia was like, okay, this is outrageous. We're pulling out because A, you are not attending to this deal, meaning the arbiters of the deal are not paying attention to the deal. They're not ensuring that the deal is on the up and up and that the deal is legit. So there's that. Two, Ukraine was smuggling weapons under the guise of smuggling grain, in which case Russia said again, this is a no-go. They have violated this deal under the belief, in a similar sense, that Israel violates their deal with Hamas. But this was taking place under the Biden administration. All right. Well, fast forward to Ukraine violating the ceasefire that, quote unquote, on energy systems and energy structures. They're attacking energy systems almost directly in repudiation of Donald Trump coming up with that deal. So you can imagine that any deal that you postulate and put forward, Russia's going to say, how do we ensure that this deal is secure and guaranteed? Very basic, very straightforward. I can't say I blame them in the least. And so 12 hours of talks. Those talks also centered around everything involving ending the war. So it wasn't just the black grain deal. In the conversations that came out, they said, look, we were talking about everything. Everything was included. Everything was on the table. And you can imagine that what might be aired as a black grain deal really would include everything. How can you not bring up all this stuff in the context of a conversation? Hey, I know we're here talking about this, but what also about this? And what about this? And may I bring in this also? Meaning, yes, you may go there to have a conversation about quote unquote black grain, but you're talking about everything, especially if you're talking for 12 hours. So they walk out the meeting. Nobody really says anything about the main conversation and discussion. And there is no communique that comes out from both sides or either side about it. A communique is supposed to come out today, but up to this point, nothing. Up to this point, nothing. What is positive? What is positive? Is there talking? That is a positive thing. That is a good thing. And look, them not having a deal is what it is. There was no expectation of a deal being reached this quickly, nor do I believe that the Russians are looking for a deal to be made this quickly, even though I think the Trump administration is. But Trump is going to have to deal with the fact that the previous administrations lied, faltered, didn't follow through, had no political will to follow through on anything that they came up with. And so you can imagine that they're going to be very cynical. And you have to get a deal with somebody that has been lied to. Have you ever dated somebody who had a different upbringing than you, or who went in relationships that didn't go all that well? Have you ever tried to date somebody like that? I will tell you from personal experience that whatever you are doesn't matter. It matters ultimately, eventually, maybe. But in the very beginning, who and what you are, you can be the most trustworthy person in the planet, doesn't matter. They don't see you through that lens. They see you through the lens of their breakups, heartbreaks, letdowns, failures, failings of family members, failings of previous relationships. You are just the next guy to follow all that. I'm saying that's Russia. We've been cheated on. We've been lied on. We've been treated poorly. We've been abused. We have grievances. And regardless of what you are being categorized in the same vein. Now, it doesn't help Trump what he's doing with Israel, nor does it help Trump that Ukraine is going rogue and is bombing pipelines, which they have done for the last several days. My point is, if your agent, your proxy is going rogue, and this is after you made a deal, a limited ceasefire deal, okay, then how do I trust you for anything larger? How do I trust you for anything else? That is the issue. That is the issue. If this was the first rodeo, okay, this deal might be quick. This is not the first rodeo. This is not the first rodeo. So, any deal is going to be, I would say from the Russian point of view, ironclad. Any deal that is made in this context is going to have to be verifiable. And no, it is not going to be quick. It's not going to be fast. It is going to be, let's say, very thoughtful. And the Russians, as they come to whatever deal, is going to pursue their military objectives, weakening, degrading, and denazifying Ukraine with every Nazi that they shoot in the face, every Ukrainian soldier that they kill, putting more and more pressure on the negotiations as they take place. Meaning, you are negotiating me right now with a weakened and damaged military. What does that look like in a month? What does that look like in 2 months? What does it look like in 3 months? As your people degrade, as you lose more territory, and as the Russian position only strengthens. It's that. What is my impetus to negotiate with you when I know that you're weakening in the context of these negotiations? You have to deal with that. You have to deal with that. But I want to end this. I want to bring in my guests. We are joined. There he is, the man himself, Kit Clarenberg. Kit Clarenberg, I hope this is right. It's been a while since I had you. Correct me if I'm wrong. Investigative journalist documenting state crimes against democracy. But from my understanding, you're on Substack. Where else can people find you, Kit?
Well, I mean, I also run the Grey Zone UK section, which is a indispensable and
Yes, it
reliable
is.
source of investigative journalism on all sorts of matters. We now have a rather exciting story out about a damning European Court of Human Rights ruling, which found Ukraine liable for the May 2014 Odessa massacre. The Western media didn't go anywhere near this, so check it out. And I'm also a regular contributor to Mint Press, and my friend and confederate Alex Rubenstein and we run a podcast or investigative project called Active Measures. So maybe see you there.
Fantastic. You are all over the place, and I follow your content. The Gray Zone is fantastic, by the way. Go into that for me just a little bit, because you're right. Western media didn't really cover it, even though I saw it. I think this was last week, where they ruled that Ukraine was responsible. But I mean, they added in, well, there was Russian propaganda. Okay, dude, whatever, right? Ukraine was responsible for the Odessa massacre. They stood there, let it basically take place. Some people were even involved in it. The state didn't get involved in the way that the state should have, and all of these people effectively died. Dig into that just for a little bit before we go into the other stories.
Oh yeah, sure. So I mean, the May 2014 Odessa massacre, it was a very key. It's rather forgotten now, but it's a very key moment in the build-up to the all-out proxy war that erupted in February 2022, where effectively the Odessa is a historically Russian city with a sizable Russian-speaking population who identified as Russian, or indeed had a high degree of nostalgia for the Soviet Union. At the start of May, anti-Maidan protesters got into a standoff with some neo-Nazi demonstrators in the city. Like huge fracas, huge skirmish. The anti-Maidan protesters ended up fleeing because they were being shot at and killed in the manner of the Maidan Square sniper massacre, which we now know was a false flag orchestrated by pro-Maidan far-right elements. Yeah. They barricaded themselves in this building in a main square in Odessa to kind of escape these kind of armed ultra-nationalist lunatics. The building was then set on fire, and the fire service and police did nothing as people died, were burned alive, died of smoke inhalation. You can find some pretty horrific videos of people jumping out of quite high windows, falling several stories, and then being attacked by fascist goons when they land severely injured on the floor. Now, for many years, the Ukrainian government and its Western backers did their best to kind of muddy the informational waters on this, and they claimed that it was a freak accident, or indeed that the anti-Maidan elements were themselves somehow responsible for this, and by extension, Russia. The European Court of Human Rights, which is a very influential legal body within the West and the kind of, I suppose you could say, the wider world, they ruled on a case brought by 28 victims of this, whether that's people who lost friends of family and loved ones in the blaze, or people who were injured in it. And they found consistently that Ukrainian authorities were not only responsible for not doing anything and standing by while these people were burned alive in by the dozen, but had actively sought to maximize the bloodshed. They refused. I mean, there was a fire station a kilometer away from the site, and its chief ordered his subordinates to not send any support, despite the fact they were getting frantic calls to extinguish the blaze. There was no attempt to seriously investigate this. There was no attempt to prosecute people for their involvement in this, despite the fact that, as I say, there is extensive video evidence where, people without masks or any kind of attempt to disguise themselves are like making Molotov cocktails to throw at the building. And I might add as well that there was a prominent neo-Nazi in Odessa who every single year would post grinning selfies of himself as he held a barbecue, recalling the Odessa events. and boast about how he was involved in burning Russians alive. And he was recently shot in the street in Odessa because in his later years he became a military recruiter, and by that, that's a conscription gang leader who drove around Odessa finding men to kidnap and throw into the meat grinder in Donbass. So it is a landmark ruling. It has been spun by Ukraine and its supporters as a vindication. They ignore the voluminous evidence presented by the court that it was Ukrainian officials of the pro-Maidan extraction that were responsible for this, focused on all of the nonsense, which is largely speculative, about supposed Russian disinformation leading to the events. And as I say, the Western media has not gone anywhere near it, which, is a very, if it had the court found against Russia, we could expect blanket media coverage, but that didn't happen. So that's just one of our latest investigations. Please do check it out on thegrayzone.com. Increasingly difficult to come by via internet search engines, but, we're still here and we're still fighting.
That's all you can do. That's all you can do. I'm saying this from a channel, like, they literally got rid of our network, right? So I understand the pressure that is being applied. The UK doesn't even have a First Amendment.
Nope.
You can imagine Google search engines, these things are working from a particular point of view. So yeah, check out his work. UK Gray Zone, they do fantastic work, to put it mildly. I have to hit Starmer.
Please do.
The notion that the UK military is up to fighting the Russians. And, when Donald Trump turned to Starmer after he got sick of Starmer running his mouth, was like, hey, you can fight the Russians, right? And everybody in the room laughed. That should get across, like, the actual point of view. That's the reality of it. The fact that you can make a punchline of it shows the reality of it. Starmer comes out looking for a coalition of the willing with Macron. He says, we will put 10,000 troops in Ukraine. And people are like, okay, dude, what are you doing? Obviously, this is a tripwire. And obviously, they're trying to goad the US into a fight, believing that their troops will be this tripwire. Macron seems to be on board for this. Every bad idea Macron loves, despite the fact he has no political power at home. And the UK military comes out and effectively says, okay, Starmer got ahead of his skis. There are no plans for this. We're not in a position to do this. Which is, I've never seen happen before. Meaning, I've never seen the military come out and contradict the person who's ahead of the military saying, that guy's out of his mind. We're not doing that. Give me your take on this. Is the UK really ready for this military engagement with the Russians in the way that Starmer keeps insisting that they are, keeps advocating for, keeps implying? I just saw an article come out where they're trying to say that the Russians were involved in the fire at the airport, Heathrow Airport. It's like, and Starmer gave the speech, Russians are in our air, sea, and water. Okay, dude, what are you doing right now? Give me your take on this. Is the UK really ready and gearing up for a war with the Russians?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. It must be remembered that yes, there is. It was reported all of 2 days ago, I believe, that senior military sources had briefed the Daily Telegraph, which is a very pro-Ukraine publication, I might add, with a history of publishing about the worst takes imaginable on how Putin has a few weeks left in power, only to retract their previous reporting and acknowledge that the battlefield situation for Ukraine is desperately bleak and irrecoverably so. It was reported that senior military sources had dismissed Starmer's fantasies of deploying British soldiers to Ukraine, and claiming that Starmer has gotten ahead of himself. And this follows Witkoff, who's Trump's envoy, very brutally smacking down European plans for a peacekeeping contingent being sent to Ukraine, and claiming that European leaders have this delusional notion that they're going to be the next Winston Churchill. This is not the first time this has happened. Okay, like there have been numerous examples where bold pronouncements and declarations have been made by Starmer, only for both current and former senior British military officials to say this is fantasy and we wouldn't be able to do it. Now, the entire British military is so hollowed out that its entire size, which includes not just frontline fighting forces, but also, people, kind of backroom medical staff, etc. They couldn't fit in a football stadium. Like the British Army today is its smallest it's ever been in centuries. It doesn't have the tanks. It doesn't have the military industrial capacity to create ammunition or shells or missiles on any scale. There was in 2021, there was a quote unquote stress test that was conducted by the Ministry of Defence to see how the British Army would fare in a true war scenario, not just an Afghanistan or Iraq where you're fighting farmers armed with AK-47s. And it found that the British Army ran out of ammunition within about 2 weeks. Right. So, it is on the one hand, it is deeply disturbing that European leaders, with Starmer at the head of this kind of mass insanity, that are speaking in these incredibly hawkish terms. Kaja Kallas, who is the former Estonian Prime Minister, who's now the EU Defence Chief, God help us all, has been coming out with statements like, well, we need to defeat Russia, because if we can't defeat Russia, how can we defeat China? I mean, they're looking beyond this proxy war and apparently into launching conflict with Beijing. I mean, that's very worrying. And it's this kind of rhetoric, which is hampering attempts by the Trump administration to broker peace. At the same time, it's not backed by anything. The European powers do not have the militaries, the wealth, and as I say, the key aspect here, the industrial capacity to even think about deploying to Ukraine. As you very adroitly stated, this is quite clearly intended to be a tripwire. And I might add that in my neck of the woods, the Balkans, there are in Bosnia, in Kosovo, and elsewhere, there are scores of British quote unquote peacekeepers who are quite clearly their purpose is to stir up tensions. Local populations don't want them here. And it means that we are one stray trigger pull away from potentially another front in this proxy war erupting. But people in this region don't want that and are determined to avoid it at all costs. So the new plan seems to be, yes, let's get some Western soldiers and maybe some Western jets into Ukraine, which Russia, as they've stated very plainly, would target and would view as a palpable demonstration that Paris and London and DC and Brussels are far from proxy war sponsors. They are active belligerents in this, and then if and when Russia does target these people or these vehicles or whatnot, then hopefully the US will come to the rescue from the perspective of London and Paris. But that's not going to happen. It is very, very, very clear that for all of the Trump administration has been rather inconsistent in its messaging on this, and they've gone from claiming that Zelensky has no cards to Putin has no cards. It's been difficult to gauge what their position is, although overall I would say that the indicators are that they do want this over sooner rather than later, and there is talk of trying to broker a ceasefire before Easter. I mean, again, I don't think that's going to happen because the Russians have very little incentive to accept any ceasefire because they're advancing everywhere. They've completely crushed Ukraine's deranged and British-inspired and directed incursion into Kursk. You know, I mean, on what grounds are they going to stop going now? And at the same time, Zelensky's tone has shifted somewhat. I mean, after that disastrous Oval Office meeting with Trump and Vance, he said, well, we're not going to accept any territorial concessions, and we will not recognize the territory, the oblasts which have been claimed by Russia. We will never accept that they are anything other than Ukrainian territory. And then very quietly, I believe it was the last week or the week before, Zelensky pared back his red lines to, well, we won't accept any further territorial concession, which is a, you know, I mean, in a couple of weeks' time, maybe that will have been revised to, please let us at least keep Kiev. You know,
I get the sense that Russia doesn't want the West, Ukraine, and you know, I don't think they want to be fighting internal wars, like these kind of internal divisions for 10 years, which is what that looks like it would be. And so, look, there may be a natural space where they get to and they say, okay, we're done. We're ready for negotiations, providing we can ensure that those negotiations are real. Like, for example, the negotiations in Riyadh, 12 hours. 12 hours. And you think to yourself, what are they talking about for 12 hours? Okay, well, they're talking about the Black Sea thing. The Black Sea thing is a really good example, even though they were talking about the rest of the war. The Black Sea thing is like, okay, well, you guys violated this the last time we did it. So why will we do this again? And so you can imagine having talks saying, okay, we need to nail this down. It needs to be nailed down in a way where we know it's nailed down. It could be that the Ukraine military weakens to such a degree that they're like, okay, we can stop here. Please stop here. And Russia's like, all right, we don't want to stop here. They really do want to stop there, but we don't want to stop here. We'll stop here, right? Like, who knows what they come up with? I agree with you. They're not giving up the territory that they've already taken. And even Witkoff pointed out that the main, it's a barrier to any kind of deal, is the concession of territory. But you've had articles come out. I believe The Independent was one. There was another one somewhere else that secretly hinted, okay, behind the scenes, they are willing to do this. They're open to doing this because they don't have a choice. They can't take it back militarily. The U.S., the main benefactor, is saying we're done. What are they going to do but complain, right? So I agree with you. I don't buy this Easter stuff. I think Trump wants to deal sooner rather than later. I think Russia's like, we have all day. We can do this like Captain America. We can do this all week. we can do this. We have been fighting this war. We've been killing and dying for 3 years. We can go for another year. We're fine. We have a 1 million man military that we're building, but these guys are bringing in kids. We're good. And so you can imagine that any negotiation gets more frantic the further westward the Russian military goes, and they're going westward. Nothing, no force on earth can stop them. So I agree with you. I totally agree with you. We'll see what this breaks down into. I do think Trump wants a deal. I think he wants to go to Moscow. He wants to sit there with Putin, sign a document, hold up his hands, and say, I was the guy that went to Moscow, just like Nixon went to China. Give me your thoughts on that, by the way. And pair it with your thoughts on Trump in general. I mean, it's been, 2 months? It feels like 3 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the thing is that I always had this was my kind of vision for how this ended. Is that, I mean, Trump is big on pomp and ceremony, and I think that he would chalk it up as a major win if he was to meet with Putin and Zelensky and hold up some signed peace deal. Or whoever replaces Zelensky. His position seems to be rather shaky. There's another point to make here as well, which is that the focus of the administration, number one, is the for a very long time, and this has not been really discussed with any with any degree of seriousness in the media, of course, is that the US is running dangerously low of ammunition and shells and vehicles and other equipment to send to Ukraine. And then when you factor in the enormous appetite of Netanyahu and his satanic sect in Tel Aviv, like all of their voracious hunger for
they give Satan a bad name. I'm sorry to interrupt. They give Satan a bad name. They give Satan a bad name. You're saying a very bad thing.
I like that, yeah, and it's funny because it's true. But the point is that basically it, for a very long time it has been acknowledged in like kind of Pentagon reports and the kind of more serious sectors of the think tank gravy train, that the US can't sustain its own ammunition needs, let alone just keep sending endless wave after wave of weapon shipments to Ukraine. Like, it is dipping into its own kind of emergency stockpiles to do this. European countries have sent their entire fleets of F-16 fighters. They've sent all of their shells to Ukraine without any ability to replace what's been sent on at any pace or scale. And so I think that, that aside from peace for peace's sake, there is a very pressing need to wrap up Ukraine very, very quickly. And also, if the ultimate end goal here was to, from the US perspective, with Maidan, etc., was to create another satellite or puppet state in Eastern Europe, where you have everything run by Western corporations, and you have the local population working for subsistence wages for Western corporations and their resources, of which Ukraine is particularly rich, are effectively just up for rape and pillage at bargain rates for the US and its European allies. In that context, like, you need enough people left alive. And I think that the Western news outlets have reported that there are entire regions of Ukraine which don't have a male population anymore, because everyone's either dead or they've fled the country or are in hiding from conscription. So that's another, reason to end this. And I might add that, there are two very clear historical precedents here, which I think that people often forget, because, for all of the tub thumping rhetoric and all of the commitments to, preserving Ukraine's democracy against tyranny and blah, 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 blah. We heard similar things about Afghanistan for 20 years, and then the US just did a runner. And then Afghanistan dropped off everyone's radar. It's not really spoken of at all anymore. 20 years in which billions, if not trillions, were pumped into creating this puppet government, and all that implies, with a CIA trained intelligence agency, a US trained and equipped military, which collapsed in less than a day. What must also be remembered was that the terms of that US retreat were not brokered with the puppet government in Kabul, but with the Taliban directly. Trump spoke to Taliban leaders about how US withdrawal would work, because there was no need to include the Afghan government in those discussions, because they had no legitimacy or credibility or even power outside Kabul itself. Now, there is a fascinating report by the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction on the collapse of Kabul, which notes that several State Department officials were interviewed for this report, and they stated that they had several conversations with Ghani, who was the US puppet in Afghanistan, where they explicitly told him, "We are leaving and we're not coming back," and he didn't believe them, because of all of the public rhetorical commitments to Afghanistan's future that had been made by US leaders, but also because all of the blood and treasure that had been expended by Washington over 20 years in Afghanistan. He thought it wouldn't happen. Now, we have to speculate whether the same conversations are being had with Ukrainian officials, and they are likewise disbelieving. That they think that this is some way of manipulating or coercing them into negotiations, and it's just like, well, I think it's entirely plausible that the US could just pull the rug out from under this. And I might add that that as a warning shot to Zelensky to accept this minerals deal, Trump pulled financial and crucially intelligence aid for Kiev for, I think it was even less than a week. And like that had a devastating impact. And I mean, just to close out this point as well, is what another very interesting phenomenon, which has been largely flying under people's radars, is that like for all European rhetoric about keeping the Ukraine war going, it led to initially the share prices of European defense contractors surging, but then they collapsed again when the heads of these contractors said, well, we don't have the ability to fulfill orders in any kind of rapid time frame. This is going to take years for us to be able to meet Ukraine's equipment needs. The same thing happened in Asia, where suddenly European leaders struck on the bright idea of buying from countries like South Korea and Japan. Again, very brief share price explosion among Asian defense contractors, and which then just evaporated when the heads of these companies said, yeah, well, we don't have the capacity to do this. So again, for all of their for all of the rhetoric that's emanating from Brussels and Paris and London, they don't have the ability to act independently or autonomously in the field of defense, quote unquote. They remain dependent on the US. So, the piper calls the tune. If the US says to them, this is over and we are absolutely not going to be bounced into keeping it going, then suddenly, people are going to fall into line.
Kit, you're so right. Because, Trump is like, I'll walk. You can do it on your own. He kept saying it. He said it more than once. And I do get the sense that you're right. Okay, you guys said we're with you for as long as it takes. Trump is bluffing. There's no way he'll walk. I think he would walk. I think if Trump, he wants the deal, but he can leave. It's not like he can say, this is Joe Biden's war. It's not my war. It's not on me. It's on Joe Biden. I did everything I could to get a deal. He wants one, but he could leave it. And so it's like, yeah, it's a threat. And he's serious. And so if Ukraine, it's doubtful, as you pointed out, look back at Afghanistan. He was willing to do the same thing. We'll walk. We'll leave. This is not my war. I didn't start this war. I'll leave this war. And I have all of my people put out that it's Joe Biden's fault. And we'll fight it politically on that as you continue to lose and as you continue to effectively fall apart on the battlefield. No, I agree with you. Everything you just said, I agree with you. I want to go to this other story that you wrote. So this is in Global Delinquents.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the MI6 connection with Stepan Bandera.
Yes.
Britain, I swear, man, has had their hands in everything. It's amazing to me. But again, Britain was masters of the world at one point. After the First World War, I think Britain had like 51% of the territory around the globe, an astonishing number, even though they were a brittle empire at that point. And so I guess it's not shocking, but Jesus, this is Stepan Bandera's sinister MI6 alliance exposed. I'm going to let you recount this. You are going into how Britain had connection with Stepan Bandera because, again, they were anti-Soviet. Britain was looking for anything anti-Soviet in order to basically push back against the Soviet Union. Just so happened Nazis tend to be anti-Soviet. So wedding is made. Go into the story for me and explain it to the audience in a way that will make sense to them.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think that the Second World War is quite an interesting thing because, Britain was very keen before it started, and one of the reasons that they actually were making deals with Hitler and were rather fond of him being in power in Germany is because he was rabidly anti-communist, and they thought that he would stop the spread of communism and socialism throughout Europe, which was, which it was a successful project for a few years until Britain ended up at war with Germany, and then they were forced to ally with the Soviets, who did all of the fighting, by and large, for the British and the Americans, and crushed the Nazis. Now, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, of course, suddenly the Soviet Union becomes Britain and America's enemy number one. And they were looking for ways in which to undermine, if not implode the Soviet Union. MI6 struck upon the bright idea of employing Stepan Bandera, who still had fled Ukraine after after World War II, but maintained significant influence locally and was ferrying kind of chaos agents into the country. This kind of dark alliance was forged in the late 1940s, and it continued for the best part of a decade. And the British were determined to maintain this alliance with Bandera, despite the fact that the CIA of all people were opposed to the British doing this, because they felt that he was he was too dangerous and too murderous even for the CIA to go near. And I think, I mean, I in the piece that you've got on the screen, I went through, and there's an enormous number of CIA files related to what's known as Operation Aerodynamic online. No one has taken the time, I mean, quite understandably, because there's so much material, has really taken the time to go over them in intensive detail, let alone kind of structure them so they can be searched and easily accessed by the general public. But like, I mean, I unearthed some absolutely extraordinary stuff, like a memo from an MI6 officer who wrote this kind of glowing appraisal of Stepan Bandera, saying that he's convincing and sincere, and praising his terrorist background and ruthless notions of power and how to achieve it, almost like as if he was this kind of charming kind of bandit style figure, this kind of like Robin Hood, when actually he's this like genocidal mass murderer, and who was whose legacy endures in Ukraine to this day. Now, I mean, I might add that's only certain quarters of Ukraine, particularly the west of the country, which is actually historically not Ukrainian territory for the most part. It was given to what was the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic from territory seized from Romania and Poland and Hungary after World War II, and it created the kind of the mongrel state of Ukraine, where you have all of these people with different backgrounds, who have different allegiances culturally or historically to different countries, and are wedged into this single entity called Ukraine, which you have, yes, Hungarians, Romanians, Russians, and then people who out and out identify as Ukrainian, and that's been a problem ever since Ukrainians' 1991 independence, and we're seeing the legacy of that today. But eventually MI6 tired of Bandera, and they were sick of how he was not only targeting Soviet authorities, but he was also kind of in this bitter conflict with other elements of the Ukrainian nationalist or ultra-nationalist movement, and undermining them. So they decided to cut all ties with him, because the ultimate end goal of the CIA and MI6 in Ukraine was to foment an ultra-nationalist proxy army that could be used to wage war against the Soviet Union with British and American help, and then therefore collapse the Soviet Union. I have an investigation coming on other declassified CIA records, which document in extraordinary detail plans for invasion, and yes, the use of Ukrainians as proxies. And there is this rather stunning map of Ukraine, which splits the country into different ranked areas where Western backing / sympathy for the Soviet Union is high. And it kind of syncs up pretty exactly with where the war is currently happening, and where it kind of arguably started, in Crimea, where the report notes, well, we have no chance of fomenting an anti-Russian, anti-communist uprising in Crimea, because it's comprised of people who identify as Russian. for instance. So this was a kind of dark alliance, which I think has enormous relevance to today, because as I have documented for the Grey Zone at some at some length, Britain has been at the forefront of trying to escalate the proxy war in Ukraine from a proxy war into all-out hot war between the West and Russia, in the kind of deranged belief that they can win this and that it won't go nuclear somehow, and they can get rid of Putin and Vulcan. Sorry,
but that is so deranged. Like meaning, as I was explaining to somebody else, I was like, there are different types of wars, right? There are wars for conquest, there are wars for land, but there's also wars that are existential. And in existential wars, everything is on the table, including blowing up European capitals. Meaning, if Russia pushed, like, look, they think Putin is bluffing, and they think, oh, he's not being serious about attacking European capitals. They are having a war on the Russian border. Why don't they see like the gravity of what is taking place right now? Like, that's the part that is shocking to me, that in their minds, we can win the war. And it's like, yeah, but how do you win a nuclear war? Nobody wins that. Everybody dies. Why don't they see that? Like, I give you an example. When they asked Starmer, they say, Starmer, are you really willing to go to nuclear war over Ukraine? He was in Britain when they were asking him this. And Starmer blew off the question and kept saying, we will defend the integrity of Ukraine. And it's like, wait a minute, did you just hear what they asked you? Are you willing to go? Meaning, they get it, right? The notion that Russia is going to allow itself to be toppled, beaten, with Western troops rummaging through Russia is a non-starter. No country would tolerate that. The US wouldn't tolerate that. We wouldn't accept that. We didn't even accept it with Cuba. Like, John F. Kennedy was like, we were in the world for US integrity, even from the standpoint of Cuba. And the best idea he can come up with was blockade. Okay, well, blockade. The generals are telling me to attack the Soviet Union with nuclear missiles, that we'll lose millions of people, but we'll be able to destroy the entire Soviet Union. Okay, we need another option. Hey, a blockade. But the thought was, if they run this blockade, we will shoot. They will shoot back. We will go to nuclear war. Meaning, at that time, even though they were willing to engage in a nuclear war, they were at the very least acknowledging it's a nuclear war. Like, they went home that they think the world is about to end. That is not the take that they seem to have in Europe. It is the take that we have in America. That is not the take they have in Europe. And I don't quite understand why.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that like I was, it's actually tied in with what I was just saying, is that like the British have been at the forefront of escalating this, because their proxy war strategy is being led by utterly deranged cold warriors who think that Russia truly is a paper tiger, and they wouldn't employ nuclear weapons, and that if we just degrade them enough, then this will lead to the outright collapse of Russia. We have seen that this is not the reverse has happened. If you look at polls, Russians have never been more united. Russians have also never been more optimistic about the future. Interestingly, support for Putin is through the roof. Across different demographics, different ideological persuasions. People of all ages. They see themselves as they see themselves as a victim of Western war, that the West is trying to destroy them, and then they have united like never before. But it might also be added as well that that the British lunatics behind all of this, like, they genuinely, it's worrying that their level of their lack of knowledge about Russia. So I mean, at this, when Evgeny Prigozhin, the former head of Wagner, staged his kind of rather pathetic publicity stunt, where he marched on Moscow before, which and then cut a deal with authorities. I mean, every Russian that I spoke to was like, right, well, he's dead. and good because it's one less traitor. There were several British defense apparatchiks, including people who were advising the British government on strategy, who were saying, well, this shows that like this is the end of Putin and it's going to lead to the collapse of his government. Does anyone talk about that publicity stunt anymore? No, because it meant nothing. These are the people who are also saying Russia can't and won't escalate. So let's keep annoying them. Let's keep provoking them. Let's keep escalating it to the point of like overt and direct Western involvement because they can't fight back and they won't. And it's like, I mean, the Russians have been remarkably restrained. That might change with formal deployment, which the Europeans are so determined to do. And I think that there's probably an element in US thinking. I mean, there certainly is an element in Russian thinking of let them try. There was it's been rather forgotten, but including by Macron himself, it seems that he announced with some fanfare that he was thinking of dispatching tens of thousands of French soldiers to Odessa to see to create a quote unquote dilemma for the Russians and halt their advances on the front line. And a Russian official was asked by a French journalist, "Well, what would you do if we did this?" And he goes, "Oh, we'll just kill them all." It would be no deterrent whatsoever. The dilemma would. Sorry, good.
I'm sorry. They would have to kill them. They wouldn't have a choice. I mean, those people would be a nose under the camel's tent. Basically, if you don't kill them, they will add more. And they would say, okay, well, Russia's not serious. Let's add more troops. I'm sorry. I was just
No, completely agree. And it's just like and this was, I think it was like a year ago, or like it was certainly a long time ago that Macron made this deranged proposal, and then it was immediately memory holed and forgotten about and moved on from because the Russian made clear it was going to be no impediment whatsoever, and it's like as I say, I do wonder whether there is an element of US thinking where it's where they think, well, let the Europeans deploy, and then when they get targeted with Iskander missiles and relentless Russian artillery fire, and they all run away, maybe they'll jettison this entire fantasy. And it's like, this was exactly what happened at the very start of this, where there were numerous videos made by foreign mercs who traveled to Ukraine because they have these, in some cases, kind of just fanatical desire to kill Russians, and they thought they were going to be given all of these fancy guns and equipment to do so, and then they just ran away because they didn't have air cover. They were in an actual war scenario which they'd never experienced before. It wasn't like Iraq and Afghanistan. It was a peer competitor war of the kind that the West has not fought, let alone won, for a very, very, very long time. I think that, particularly if it was the case that body bags were returning to Western capitals in any profusion. I mean, we've already had numerous seeming cover stories for why like Polish soldiers seem to have this habit of dying in strange accidents, totally unrelated to the Ukraine war, of course. And Russian officials have claimed that they have detected the presence of Western special forces operatives in Ukraine. There was recently a trial of a British merc who travelled to Ukraine. There was also a tragic story of a British teenager who went to Ukraine at the age of 17. And then was within literal seconds of being deployed to the front line, killed by a Russian drone. And it's like, well, that would be the experience of the formal armies of Britain and France et al. Again, let them try. Let's see what happens. Hopefully, it won't escalate into nuclear war. God help us all.
Man, it's like this guy died skiing. Like,
yeah. There's been an awful lot of that. Yeah, he did. He wasn't looking when he crossed the road.
Just weird stuff, man. Kit, everything you've said is fantastic. Everything you said is fantastic. I agree with it all. love to have you back. Thank you for this. And just for the audience, one more time, Kit Clarenberg, everybody's saying in the audience, this is a great guest. I agree with them. Kit Clarenberg, investigative journalist, documenting state crimes against democracy. Kit, where can people find you?
You can find me just on Twitter, or X, which is just Kit Clarenberg. Likewise, my website, Global Delinquents, that's kitclarenberg.com. Find me at the Grey Zone, Mint Press, The Cradle, many other outlets. Thank you so much for having me on, Jamal. Always a pleasure, never a burden, my friend. God bless you.
You do fantastic work. You have a good one, man. Be safe.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Oh, he is fantastic. He is fantastic. And the Grey Zone does fantastic work. Definitely check them out. Definitely check Kit out. It is a pleasure to have him. I thank him for joining me. Great conversation. Mark is going to be on shortly. I want to give a shout out to my audience. I didn't have the opportunity to hear this clip. This clip is fantastic. It is exactly what I think is going on behind the scenes. Look, man, I've told you before, I thought that Elon Musk is an albatross around Trump's neck. I did not think he was a benefit to Trump at all. He is in it for his own wants, regardless of what it is. Now, I could be completely wrong. I don't know what is in a man's mind, but as a benefit, I don't buy it. And apparently he is ruffling feathers in the White House. J.D. Vance has apparently complained about Elon Musk. Now, to be fair, I have not heard this clip. So I'm playing this clip without hearing the clip because I just heard it while we were doing the show. I'm going to run this. I'm going to see what happens. We'll see what this clip says together.
He is from South Africa, and he's cosplaying as this great American leader in a room that has the portraits of some of the greatest men that ever lived in this country, and he has the audacity.
It sounds like a clip of J.D. Vance going after Elon Musk. I need to play this again because I didn't fully understand everything that was being said. Now, J.D. Vance is saying this is AI. J.D. Vance is saying this is AI. Let's hear it one more time.
But he's not even in Britain. He's from South Africa, and he's cosplaying as this great American leader in a room that has the portraits of some of the greatest men that ever lived in this country, and he has the audacity.
I don't know if that's J.D. Vance. So I do want to say that right off the bat. It could be AI. I don't know if that's AI. It would not shock me if J.D. Vance is complaining about Elon Musk. Many people in MAGA, even Steve Bannon has pointed out he's not even American, he's South African. And he is running around destroying. Like, look, the notion that the richest man on the planet with nearly $1 trillion, like literally on his way to getting $1 trillion. As I've told you, I don't think billionaires should exist. Lord knows, I don't think trillionaires should exist. And that super billionaire has decided to focus on public services to the poorest people in this country. Are you serious? You really think that that's a benefit? You really think that that is something that helps you with the American public, especially now? Meaning you've gone to and taken a knife to Social Security, meaning Elon Musk, Medicaid, Medicare. You fired people who are making a basic, let's say $50,000 a year, if they're making that much. You fired scores of those people out of government services, government jobs. You really think that's a good look for the Trump administration? The worker generation, meaning you must not forget Donald Trump got elected by the working class to the chagrin of Democrats everywhere. The party that's supposed to be the party of the working class. Donald Trump got elected by the working class. And in getting elected by the working class, nobody elected Donald Trump to destroy Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, fire worker. Nobody hired Trump for that. Nobody did. And so going into an electoral period, what people are going to remember, Trump appointed Elon Musk. Elon Musk, representing Trump, decided to fire workers. The richest man on the planet decided to fire workers. The richest man on the planet decided to destroy Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, something that the poorest of Americans use. The richest man on the planet decided to disrupt all of these government services that regular people need and regular people are at the helm of. They're going to remember that. That is not going to be easily forgotten. At least I don't think it is. I could be wrong. That was one of the first things that Donald Trump did. It is in the media and the news everywhere. And so it doesn't shock me that when Rubio gets into a fight with Elon Musk at a meeting, or when Hegseth may take issue with the firings that Elon Musk wants to do at the Defense Department when he's at the helm of the Defense Department, or Elon Musk, or I'm sorry, JD Vance is like, he's not even an American. He's an immigrant. So Trump takes an anti-immigrant policy with an immigrant in his administration, firing Americans and saying Americans are too stupid to do various jobs. Why do they think that's a good look? And I have to believe that people in the Trump administration, especially the ones who are more astute, may say this is not a good look, which is why, it wouldn't shock me if that clip is real. Nor would it shock me if JD Vance would say it's AI, despite the fact it may be a real clip. So look, I don't know which one it is. I have no idea which one it is. Like I said, I don't think that's a good look for Trump. I think the people who are in the Trump administration that have some political, creativity, some political astuteness, in the least, even at a least political level of astuteness, would say, hey, do any of you think that this is going to, fall back on us in a negative way? Yes, it will. It will. Which is, by the way, part of the reason why I don't want them to do it. Look, I have two reasons for not wanting them to do it. Both are self-serving, but both are true. And both are to the best interests, even though they are self-centered. In one sense, those are human beings that you've made their lives dramatically worse. As someone who's just lost the job in October because the previous administration decided to go after the company, I am a leaf in the wind. I am a leaf in the wind because they got rid of my job, and I've been floating around ever since, place to place to place, having nowhere to be. That sucks. It's one thing if I choose as an option to do it. It's another thing if it's imposed upon me. It is weird because I have said, oddly enough, in moments at 3 a.m. between, myself and my God, no, I don't believe that anything listens in that sense, or anything cares. Maybe something listens. I don't think anything cares. But that I've wanted this ability to simplify my life. I did not want that imposed upon me. Those are different things. I'm saying losing a job sucks. It sucks. It's one thing if you choose to leave. It's another thing if you're fired. And I'm saying Musk has done that to scores of people in the federal government that was just doing the job that they were hired to do. That is a negative. That is a clear negative. It's a negative on the economy. It's a negative on those people's lives and the family of those people whom I would wager had families. 2, it allows Democrats to just not do anything, to not change, to not alter, to not have any self-reflection, and they just point and say, hey, they're destroying Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. That's bad. You should vote for us. Okay, I don't want people to vote for them under that model. Meaning, I don't want people to turn and say, okay, we're going to go to Democrats because Republicans suck. Under the model to which they're presented, where they don't have to change anything. They don't have to be anything else. They can just be the crappy, impotent ridiculousness that they currently are and still get votes. I don't want them to get votes under that model. I just don't. And so both are bad because it allows the Democratic Party to be what it currently is, which is useless to any objective for the American public. That is not helpful to my interests. That is not helpful to the things I want politically to take place. And so on two fronts, it is a negative for it to take place. This is not a rah-rah for Trump. I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't like Trump. I think the only thing he's doing well is dealing with the Ukraine issue. Putting the screws to the CIA and the FBI, okay, fair enough, I accept that. Dismantling US aid, I accept that. Putting in RFK Jr. to as the Health and Human Services, good, I accept that too. I know a lot of people disagree with me on that. I don't care, I accept it. Even Gabbard has tweaked and been bent in the form for Trump. I don't like that, but I'm hoping she's still giving him correct information, even if she takes a different tact. What he's doing domestically is nonsense. It's ridiculous. Nobody hired him for it. I accept that, though. I knew that was going to take place on some level. What I am hoping is that shattering the Democratic Party forces them to come back into something different, something useful, even if it's useful in specific things. Right now, it is pointless. There is an energy that is taking place on the wings in these events that Sanders is having. My issue with that is if he dumps that into a broken party, then it becomes a pointless endeavor also. It becomes pointless. What I need, what I require, what I deeply want is for whatever cobbles back together, realizes we are doing this wrong and we need to get back to basics. If the Trump administration goes so far off the rails that the working class is like, okay, we screwed up. There's no happiness nowhere. And we will accept a Democratic Party because so then this plan has failed. And then when I'm saying plan, as if I had any influence, this notion or idea has fundamentally failed. Trump has gone off the rails and has forced people back into a broken party that is not going to do anything for those people. So no, I don't want him going off the rails for both reasons. Firing people sucks. It destroys their lives. And those people lump back to Democrats. So there's that. But my guest is here. He is going to be happy as a lark today because all of these negotiations went beneficial. That they come to a deal. They're ending the war. I'm joking, Mark. Mark Sloboda, International Relations and Security Analyst. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay today?
Jamarl, I'm alive. How are you? Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
I'm alive. I'm safe.
Is that Jamarl?
That is Jamarl indeed.
I just didn't know who that fresh baby-faced guy was.
I shaved it off. I was like, time for it to go. You know what's wild? When I did the first cut and all the hair for it to sling, I was like, I'm gonna miss that hair. I actually grew accustomed to it. I was like, all right, this beard, this is my homeless beard, right? I was like, time for me to shave my homeless beard. I need to shave it. It's getting too extreme.
I think if I tried to shave it, my skin would come off, but the beard would remain.
Your beard is fantastic, Mark. You should keep it. It's a manly thing to have a beard.
It's showing my age.
Let me ask you this: 12 hours of negotiations, and up to this point, I have not seen a statement come out of Kremlin or Washington. I've seen comments that are being made, but no communique. I was looking for the communique. I was curious on what they were going to say. What is your estimation of these talks?
Nothing burger. Nothing burger, right? I mean, it's been the same opinions I had since before these talks, but absolutely nothing in the previous round of talks and the one before that and this round of talks. And nothing I've seen. It was very interesting. There was a statement made during a break by the U.S. side, I believe, yesterday that, well, it's not important that a document comes out of every negotiations. It's important that we're talking and we're understanding each other, which is to say that, there's no agreement. We accomplished nothing. The Russian, the one comments I've seen out of the Russian side was difficult but useful dialogue, right?
Mhm.
Which is to say that there was absolutely no agreement on anything whatsoever. Basically they're burying this, but I mean, maybe appropriately so, as this latest round of talks was about technical details. It was technical in nature, right? So very limited, right? This was to focus on some form of agreed ceasefire in the Black Sea that was frequently being referred to as, at least on the Russian side, as some type of abomination resurrection of the Black Sea Initiative, or the grain deal, as it was called previously. And of course, beside the talks themselves, the technical details, it's rather interesting on who was attending, right? On the Russian side, Karasin is a sitting senator in the Federation Council. He's head of the Foreign Relations Committee. And the other person representing Russia was Beseda, whom is a former deputy director of the FSB, retired. He is the director of a department within the FSB. He is also still an advisor to the sitting FSB, head of the FSB. Now Beseda is somewhat of an expert on Ukraine. In fact, there's a whole toxic sea of mostly false rumors previously about Beseda, about his involvement in Ukraine. He's somewhat of a Ukraine expert, and I think he can best be described as extremely hostile to the Maidan regime. He was reportedly actually in Ukraine when the West-backed Maidan putsch overthrew the Ukrainian government. And he had been pushing or making the argument for a long time that Russia should have intervened earlier than what they did, which is something that I was arguing about from 2014 onward as well. There's been a whole lot of rumors that he was sidelined, that he was imprisoned, that 150 FSB people were demoted because of his wrong analysis or something like that. And all of that has been proven to be false. He retained his position, and this was admitted quietly later by both U.S. intelligence and, by the way, the Kiev regime's military intelligence chief, the genocidal sociopath Kyrylo "I like the dark" Budanov. But yeah, they both admitted that, that was all nonsense. Beseda was still in place. He retired in a couple of years. He is quite old, but he retained a position as an advisor to the FSB director, like on hot dial if they've got serious issues. And now he's been brought back to negotiate on the Russian side. And I think we can be safe to assume that he is extremely knowledgeable about Ukraine and will be extremely tough in negotiations. But these are they're not minister level people, right? Notice that, right? This is people, unless you have been paying minute attention to Russian events, these are names that have probably passed over your, who are these guys? Right? Same thing on the U.S. side. We have a representative of U.S. State Department, state planning, right? These are not high-ranking officials. Now, the Kiev regime also had a team,
yes,
right,
they did.
in Saudi Arabia for these talks.
Yes,
and that was headed up by the Kiev regime's defense chief, Rustem Umarov, right? So they sent minister level people. Now, there was never any time where the Russians or Ukrainians met each other, right? The U.S. is trying to play this as if they are some type of mediator, rather than the patron of the losing side of this conflict, which is rather interesting. And Russia seems to be playing along more out of interest and curiosity than anything else at this point. But it's still often billed as that these are Russian-U.S. negotiations. The word bilateral has popped up in a undeniable number of times that you can't ignore it. That this is a negotiation between the U.S. and Russia. Yeah, and
but they are.
I mean,
wait, real quick, Mark. But they are. I guess my point is, yes, I get it. Right, Ukraine and Russia are having a war. Who is funding? Who's giving weapons? Who's giving money? Who's giving support? Like at a certain point, even Rubio said, "This is a proxy war."
This is a proxy war. Exactly. I mean, if the U.S. Secretary of State says that, you can't really, however much that may not be the way that your narrative has depicted this conflict, and the media is very loath to acknowledge that. Even the Trump administration, at the highest level, has admitted that at this point. So, but that does not necessarily mean that Trump's leash on Zelensky is in firm control of this beast, this monster, as they thought or as they would like it to be. So the Ukrainians still have to be involved at some level, and however grudging, their acceptance must be forced out of them, right? I mean, but here's the problem, because we already know, although, again, this is not being reported in the Western media, but the first partial ceasefire, right? The ceasefire against energy infrastructure is already broken, right? Multiple times. The Kiev regime has attacked Russian energy infrastructure almost every day since there was an agreement. We don't know actually when the agreement came into force. We don't know, because it came into force, Russia, minute after talking with Trump. In fact, Putin ordered the shooting down of several drones, right, with air defense and air power that were on locked courses, remotely operated drones towards energy infrastructure in Ukraine. They had to be shot down. And there have been no Russian attacks on the Kiev regime's energy infrastructure since that agreement with Trump, right? Now, there have been lots of other attacks. There was a huge drone attack over the weekend on Kiev, on Odessa, and elsewhere, right? But not against energy infrastructure. The Kiev regime, on the other hand, has blown up the major terminal in Suja, causing very substantial damage, it must be said, on that pipeline that had been bringing gas to Europe, to Slovakia, to Hungary, and the like. And the damage is so bad that the estimates out of Russia is that even if repairs were to be attempted, that they would take 2.5 years.
Are you serious?
Yes. All right. And there have been several attacks since then. Some of them, again, one of them causing very dramatic fires, another one being stopped by air defense just prior to impact. But they've been attacking every day. I mean, it's not something even that you can say is some rogue elements. Now, it must be said that the Kiev regime is not admitting to any of this, right? When responding to the attack on the Suja terminal, they fall back on the Russians blew up their own shit again. I mean, that's where we are. Just like with the attack on the Crimean Bridge, the Nord Stream pipelines, the artillery attacks for a decade on the Donbass. Oh, it's those crazy pro-Russians shelling themselves, right? Or the hundreds of assassinations of the leaders of the Donbass, militia leaders, political leaders, activists, anyone in eastern Ukraine, officials at all levels who has been opposed to the Maidan regime. It was all, this is infighting among the militias, or the Russian FSB is cleaning house. That was the narrative for years. And it was only in the last 2 years it's been admitted to, right? In interviews in the Western media, Budanov the Kiev regime's military intelligence chief, the one who likes the dark, he openly admitted, yeah, that was us. We assassinated all of these people. We had a very extensive assassination. So at each one of these, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? It's always those Russians doing it themselves. And usually the Western mainstream media just reports that uncritically because they're nothing but rote propagandists, right? Now, later, they're often forced to quietly retract those things when the U.S. government or the Kiev regime side at some point, months or years later, admits to it, right? And no one really believes, right, that Russia blew up this gas terminal in Suja, right? I mean, but no one is going to challenge the Kiev regime on it either because they're good little propagandists, right? So until they receive something official from their own government, then they have to pretend to play along. So Russia has acknowledged that these violations are occurring, but they're once again playing the trusting fools, and they're not responding in kind. They've reserved the right to, but they're going through the motions, I guess, of showing willingness or whatever you want to have it to Trump, right? Which I think is
a bad idea,
futile and stupid and self-defeating. And there's a lot of criticism within Russia, right? From the war hawk side, right? That what is going on here, right? Now, it has to be said that there isn't a whole lot of belief that Putin is about to sell the SMO out, right? That in fact, there is quite a great deal of evidence on the other side. Last week, Putin appeared at a annual summit, a meeting of the heads of the industrialists and entrepreneurs. It's like a meeting of the American Chamber of Commerce, more or less, right? That's an idea. Top business in industry and business from across Russia. And he spoke in a closed meeting to them, right? And it seems that he talked mostly about what was going on in Ukraine. And of course, I believe that this was said with the full knowledge that it would then be reported back. And that's how he chose to do it. But he made clear that these were going to be extremely difficult negotiations, that they were going to last a long time, that there was very little chance of them achieving anything in the end, that the Russian business leaders and entrepreneurs, industrialists should be prepared that the sanctions will be in effect for the foreseeable future, like decades, that is not going to change, even if some type of deal was reached. Considering the U.S. history with removing sanctions, I mean, the one that's always brought up, of course, is the Jackson-Vanik sanctions leveled on the Soviet Union were only removed against Russia, more than 20 years after the Soviet Union dissolved itself. And even then, they were replaced within a few months by the Magnitsky Act sanctions, which did just about the same thing. So, unfortunately, most of these sanctions, even if they were to be removed, let's say that you believe that the Trump administration was genuine, most of them still have to go through Congress, and Congress is hostile to this, right? And most of them would require a 2/3 majority, right, for the Senate to revoke them. So it's not going to happen, right? And the Russian government is very realistic about this. But what's more is he made clear that in negotiations, Russia was going to demand not stick by their claims, right? Under the Russian Constitution, right, as it has been changed, that not only Crimea, but Donetsk, Lugansk, and the entirety of Kherson and Zaporozhia, even those still areas of it still outside of Russia control, must, right, be part of Russia. As not only that, but that both the Kiev regime and the U.S. must acknowledge that they are part of Russia, right? Which is saying, tantamount to saying there will be no peace deal, right? And he went further and said that if they do not agree to this in a short period of time, that Russia will then extend their claims to Odessa, Kharkov, and basically what he's saying is the entirety of the east bank of the Dnieper. Right.
I mean, keep in mind though, all of this is taking place as the Russian military continues to move.
Yes.
And so it's not like, okay, we have a ceasefire and we're negotiating. We're negotiating.
There is no ceasefire that
No,
is
no, no.
affecting military operations at all.
No. I'm saying this is not a case where Trump is like, okay, we got a ceasefire and we're negotiating. We're negotiating while we continue to move westward. So, truth be told, they could take that territory while they are still negotiating. In which case,
it will be a very long time. We're talking more than a year, more than likely, right? I mean, if we're talking Zaporozhye City and Kherson City at a minimum, right? Before we even start talking about cities like Odessa, right? And Kharkov. But these are all big cities, right? Big cities, millions of people. And Russia has not taken any cities of that size thus far in this conflict, right? Donetsk and Lugansk City, the biggest cities in those regions, were already, right, in DNR, LNR hands when these conflicts began. And the next biggest cities, right, that have been taken, Mariupol, Bakhmut, and others, these have all been cities a maximum of 200,000 people, right? And everything else has been towns and villages, small cities, towns and villages. There has not been an armed taking or any other kind of taking of cities the size of Kherson City, which Russia withdrew from, right? Kherson City surrendered to Russia as that entire region, the whole South did, right? They just went over to the Russian side. There was very little fighting in the beginning of the conflict when Russia went in the intervention in 2022. And their militaries were largely stood down, right? There was penetration of the military, the political, the intelligence elites, and they were happy to stand down. It didn't happen everywhere in the country, but it did happen in the South, in Kherson and Zaporozhye. And when Russia withdrew from Kherson City, then to a lot of internal criticism, there wasn't a fight. There wasn't a fight for the city itself, right? So there hasn't been a big city assault like that thus far in this conflict, right? And that's gonna, no matter what, there's a general idea that this is just about over. And that's not what is happening on the battleground, right? Yes, in local locations like in Suja, in Kursk, Russia achieved a dramatic victory, in part due to a special operation, in part due to a couple months worth of strangulation of the Kiev regime supply lines into Suja. It all happened very quickly. There was a crumbling. There was, a rout. There were prisoners taken, right? It's still ongoing. But it is not like the Kiev regime is completely military, right? Is completely crumbling everywhere else on the battlefield. They are currently launching an offensive into the Belgorod region. Right. In fact, it is possible that they will take their first town.
Go into Belgorod, because I saw that and I wasn't sure the seriousness of it.
It's fairly serious, right? So Russia repelled the first 2 or 3 days of initial assaults that were, we're talking 200, 300 people and equipment, right? Doing extreme damage to equipment, but Zelensky keeps throwing reinforcements into this, right? They haven't taken anything but during the first 2 or 3 days. They didn't take anything but tree lines across the border and that sort of thing. They were mostly their equipment destroyed, driven back, but they've been throwing so much, that they're achieving a certain amount of tactical success just through momentum. No count. They're not counting lives or equipment lost, right? Because they're fighting the narrative war here. They need a chunk of Russian territory because that's where Zelensky's mentality is, right? So they're not counting costs, they blew up a bridge across a small local river that to which the Russian forces defending Demidovka were reliant on. Now, presumably, they will try to put up pontoon bridges and so forth as a replacement, but this will put the Russian forces defending at least under temporary stress for supplies. And it is likely that the Kiev regime could use this to surge forward. We're not talking, huge number. We're not talking thousands of people, but there are hundreds of people fighting on both sides. And what's more, Russia, the Kiev regime, by reports, it must be said by the Kiev regime side, but these have been echoed by Russian unofficial sources, right? The war correspondents, the Telegrams journal. Russia was using helicopter gunships to do a lot of damage to the vehicles that the Kiev regime was sending here. But evidently, this already happened 2 days ago, I believe. They detected, they got some intelligence of where these helicopters were being landed, being based, refueled, resupplied out of, and they hit it with HIMARS. And they destroyed it, according to reports, again, which are not verified, but seem credible because enough people on the Russian side unofficially seem to have acknowledged it. They wiped out 4 helicopter gunships, which is no small, it's not going to cripple the Russian side or anything, but you take out 4 helicopters and one shot, that's a success, right?
Yeah.
And again, it has to be noted that it has been admitted years ago now in reporting in the New York Times that every single HIMARS shot receives its coordinates from U.S. officials, right? Every single HIMARS shot, not just the ATACMS, but every single one, because HIMARS is guided by satellites, right? So that means the U.S. had to be involved, meaning the Trump administration, because this is now the Trump administration's war, right? So they're, again, big cost, right? This is all being very quiet on both sides now because the Russian side doesn't want to admit that its mainland is under attack again, right? So soon after recovering Suja and most of the Kursk incursion zone. And the Kiev side doesn't want to admit anything until they've got something that they can claim as a success, at least that first village, right? Demidovka. So it's happening very quietly, but this is happening. And the Kiev regime is launching counterattacks in multiple other areas on the front, right? Always with a high cost, right? But the beast isn't done yet, right? I mean, there is still heavy, intense fighting going on, right? In the Kupiansk area, they're trying to push back Russian forces bridgehead across the Oskol. They're throwing a lot of forces into that. There continue to be counterattacks south of Pokrovsk and in other areas in the Toretsk environs and so forth. So there's still a lot of heavy fighting going on. Biden pumped them full of a lot of weapons, right? The European Union, by all accounts, even if you leave their ridiculous rhetoric of 800 billion and all of that on the floor, does seem to be upping their game a bit. And it has to be said that armaments from the U.S. are continuing, right? Trump hasn't signed off on any new arms packages, but a significant portion, right, of the previous arms packages under the Biden administration going back years have been for production, right? Not drawn out of the Pentagon stock, right? About maybe half of it was, maybe a little more than half, but a lot of it was contracts to the U.S. military industrial complex because they were already out of stuff on the shelves, right? They had already all of the disposable shells, all of, that weren't wouldn't cut into the Pentagon's minimum levels of storage, right? Were already exhausted. So they started doing direct contracts with the U.S. military. And all those contracts are still valid. So there is always a certain amount of shells and equipment and munitions and everything else that is being supplied to the Kiev regime on a regular basis, right? It's nowhere near what Russia has been producing and providing to their military forces. That's long been admitted. But it is certainly enough to keep this fighting going on for a very long time.
Yeah.
And the Kiev regime is expressing its fury over the negotiations, even with no result from this latest round of negotiations. And there has been a statement, presumably, arranged and agreed upon by Zelensky himself, I would guess. But a member of the Kiev regime's parliament, the Rada, has come out and openly decried Witkoff, right? Trump's
they say he was Putin. He was working with Putin. They say
he's a Russian agent, and he's spreading Russian disinformation. And then Kiev is demanding his withdrawal. Now, it must be said that it's very interesting that Trump is using him, right? Witkoff. He's already the go-to Trump envoy for the Middle East.
By the way, I like Witkoff. And you could tell me, I think he's a straight shooter, which is what I like.
He is a slimy New York real estate developer with no experience in diplomacy, particular knowledge of foreign affairs, of the conflict in Ukraine or the Middle East or anything else. His number one quality is that he's charming like a used car salesman and that he is personally loyal to Trump. Now, but that's aside. I'm going to put that to the side. Right. I know there's some people that are trying to talk him up and saying that he's a great diplomat and he reminds them of, I heard an analyst whose name I'm not going to mention say that he reminds them of Kissinger. I'm like, really? Okay, I'm going to leave that on the floor. But what is important to me about his selection and extensive use by Trump is that he doesn't trust the blob at all, right?
Yeah.
Right. He is not from the U.S. foreign policy and security establishment, right? This has been one of the things that I've argued, like, where does Trump find the people who politically, particularly on foreign policy issues, either agree with him or at least willing to go along with what he says, while the entire blob, the entire U.S. foreign policy and security establishment is steeped in what amounts to an exceptionalist ideology committed to American hegemony, right? Not on the terms that Trump interprets, right? Trump is reinterpreting U.S. foreign policy, right? Not in a good way, right? I mean, maybe good for one particular area, like it might work out to Russia's advantage. Maybe we'll see. That's undetermined yet. The Palestinians and Iranians are probably going to end up on the short end of the stick, right? But he is reprioritizing foreign policy instead of what he sees as a wasteful, expensive pursuit of hegemony that is too costful to the U.S. He wants to be the first great power among three great powers competing for influence and geopolitics in the world. And he basically claims the Western Hemisphere is his. His most recent statements that any country that dares conduct oil trade with Venezuela will suffer 25% tariffs is saying that, right? I mean, that I don't know how that's going to work, all right? But we don't know. But those kinds of make clear what Trump's intentions are. So, like I said, yes, it's different. It is a radical reinterpretation, but it is still an American first, old school imperialism school of U.S. foreign policy. That doesn't make it good. Don't think that by trading Pepsi out for Coke that there's now a good guy in the White House. There's a guy who is doing things different, but it is still an imperial American first agenda. even if it's the transition will inevitably result in a lot of chaos bomb, right? And a lot of danger, to the U.S. position, right? Because it's weakening things as it's attempting to rebuild them in different directions. But it is an indication that Trump doesn't trust anyone. And that's how he's getting around, right? He's just not relying for what he considers to be his most important foreign policy negotiations on anyone from the blob because he doesn't trust them.
As he should.
He's going to a loyal personal friend whom has no experience in what he's doing whatsoever, which
That's
is
true.
right?
That is true. But at the very least, it's go and affect my will in a way that I think you'd affect my will, as opposed to a Rubio where you may not actually trust because this is not really Rubio's position.
I'm not criticizing it.
Yeah.
In ultimate terms, I'm pointing out that there are negative things, but I'm saying it's extremely interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So the Kiev regime side is demanding that Witkoff must go, right? That he's a Russian propagandist, that he's a Russian agent. And boy, do they not know how to deal with the Trump administration, because this is just going to piss Trump off, right? I mean, this is literally going to piss Trump off because Witkoff is his good, personal, loyal, what exactly is it that a mafia don calls his sergeants sent out into the field? Because that's
lieutenant, like he's the lieutenant.
Yeah, that's effectively what he is, right? Secondly, and part of Zelensky is decrying outright that there are people, right, totally not looking at you, JD Vance and Witkoff and others, that are under Russian influence, right? Which means not under our influence within the Trump administration. And Zelensky is warning about this. And here, this is the kicker. He said that one of the disinformation that is being fed to Trump is that he doesn't want peace, right? But he's always wanted peace now, suddenly, according to this. This is what Zelensky, who was decrying, had to be, with a cutoff of military intelligence aid, at least theoretically, for a couple of days, right? That was what had to twist his arm behind his back, break his knees, whatever, to make him agree to even, ceasefire. Yeah, all right. So so it's all lies that Zelensky doesn't want peace. But I guess in order to prove that, Zelensky a photo op with Time magazine, right? That came out over this weekend, right? He's on the cover, but more importantly, inside, yes. So he's on the cover with a title that shows Zelensky in another heroic pose, but this time it says "End Game," right? But inside the article, there are other pictures that obviously Zelensky wanted staged and taken. He took right outside his office. He now has 2 paintings, right? And there's a third one that he mentioned that is in his bedroom, right? That wasn't shown in the photo op. But Zelensky, right, in this photo for Time magazine, standing in between 2 paintings. One is a picture of Ukrainian troops heroically invading Russia in the Kursk region. And the other one is of the Kremlin in flames in Moscow. The third one, which he didn't show, but he told us is in his bedroom, is of a Russian warship being sunk. And he said, "This is where I live." Right? This is where I live. But, right? It's Russian disinformation that I don't want peace, right? So just so you understand where this whole thing is going, this is why the ceasefire on energy infrastructure is already a wash, that Russia is simply continuing to follow despite multiple attacks on their energy infrastructure. And this is just meant as a bone to Trump, or to play along to Trump, whatever, and it's pissing a lot of people off, in the generals and other people in Russia, it must be said. This grain sea, this renewed Black Sea initiative, this grain initiative 3.0 or whatever you want to call it, is grinding to nothing before anything is agreed upon.
To be fair,
there's no matter what Trump and Putin or Trump and Putin's people, even if they eventually agree on things, they have to get their proxy to play along, and their proxy with full support from the Europeans is not playing along.
The energy attacks are an FU to Trump.
Yeah.
For this deal, and they are exactly an FU to Trump. The moment that Putin gave the order, Zelensky said, "Okay, yeah, I give the order too." So both of them agreed upon this relatively quickly. And then Zelensky, I would imagine, said FU to Trump, who I would imagine he hates, he doesn't like you say, he doesn't necessarily know how to deal with them because Donald Trump wants to end the war in a way that Zelensky doesn't. But on the other side of it, though, they didn't come to a grain deal after 12 hours of talks. So I would imagine
to think that they could come to a deal for something as complicated as inspections of commercial shipping and the like in the Black Sea, right? Which Russia would absolutely, because this is what happened last time, is that the commercial ships were used to transport, grain ships were used to transport arms, from NATO, including from the US, right? Into Odessa, right? Into the Kiev regime's ports on the Black Sea. And Russia's saying, if we're going to resurrect this thing, then there needs to be real inspections, and there would demand a much more stringent regime. Now, another thing
real quick, I'm just pointing out that the fact that they didn't come to that deal is evidence that Putin is aware that Ukraine is violating it, knows they're violating it, and is taking it out on some level like, dude, you're not even living up to the agreement, this limited agreement that we made. How are you now saying, let's have this larger grain deal that you've already violated twice?
Yeah, and in the previous time, the Kiev regime, of course, was conducting attacks on Russian ships and ports with their drones, somewhat effectively, it must be said, right? Because drones, surface drones, they're a major threat to ships at sea, right? It's a new form of naval warfare. And right now, the truth is that there's actually a lot of trade being conducted through the Black Sea, right? Regular ships go in and out of Odessa and other Ukrainian ports, right? That's happening on a daily basis. It's not like there's no grain going out or anything like this now. Russia occasionally identifies a ship that for sure has military supplies on it and takes it out, right? Or hits the port when it's unloading or something like that. But for the most part, they're still getting lots of stuff through because it is always more efficient, right? It is always much easier to ship things in quantity like vehicles and artillery shells and bombs and the like by trade than it is to transport them by train, switching to train and whatever. So that's going on, right? So and simply on those terms, there's not a great deal of desire on the Kiev regime side for this, right? They're already conducting plenty of trade, right? Yeah, they take some hits, but they're happy with that, right? The Russian Navy is, for the most part, other than its submarines, bottled up away from Ukrainian shores because it would be a waste, right? There's too much potential attacks on them from drones, right? What can Russia hit back? The Kiev regime doesn't have a navy anymore, right? So, it would be pointless to put their own ships at risk to drones that have brought down ships or conducted serious damage on them before. So they're happy. In fact, Bulgaria and Romania have come out and they're extremely unhappy with these negotiations. Again, Europeans, right? NATO members, because they don't want any change to the status quo. they're happy with the status quo, which means they're both getting enough trade and military supplies into the Kiev regime under current conditions. They don't want to risk anything that would extend, as they see it, potentially extend Russian naval influence in the Black Sea by making the Kiev regime. One of the things that the Kiev regime is doing in order to conduct some of its long-range attacks on Russia energy infrastructure and like on Engels Air Force Base is they're using their surface drones as mini aircraft carriers for drones.
Yeah.
They're not using them right now for attacks on Russian ships because the Russian ships are all basically hiding, right, in ports close to Russia. So what they're doing is they've modified their surface drones to carry other drones, right? They're very hard to detect. They just trundle across the Black Sea and launch their drones, their long-range drones, right off of Russia's coast on the other side of the Black Sea. And they're getting some success with it, right?
Yeah.
Even if a majority of those drones are then brought down by Russian air defense, then still some of them are going to get through, right? And that alone for them is worth it right now. And which is why they're not crazy either about the any attack stopping of attacks on energy infrastructure or any Black Sea deal. They don't want it, and it's going to be very hard to make them agree to it, right? Even if rhetorically they say, "Oh, it's just Russia attacking themselves. We had nothing to do with it."
I know. I guess at some point Trump is going to have to put screws to Europe, and he's going to have to put screws to Zelensky. Like they're doing everything in their power to kill any notion of negotiations. And I have to imagine that Russia is looking at this saying, dude, your dog is peeing on my yard.
Yeah.
Like, meaning whatever we are negotiating for 12 hours, at the end of the day, Ukraine is going rogue. They're blowing up stuff that we agreed upon that they weren't supposed to blow up. Why are we going to agree to a deal when you can't even get this under control? That has to be part of the conversation.
Is that Russia knows that these will go nowhere, that there is no chance, even if they can come to agreements with the Trump administration, that this will ever become effective because of the opposition by the Kiev regime and the Europeans. They are going along with the process to try to salvage an improvement in bilateral relations with the Trump administration out of this. That is what they're doing. And as far as the Russian are concerned, let's be honest. What Trump is doing is saving a U.S. proxy regime in Kiev, a Banderite fascist proxy regime. Because if any peace deal was actually reached, that is the only thing that can save that regime from Russia at this point. Because Russia would, in a span of a year or 2 years or 3 years, right,
Yeah.
even with continued U.S. and European aid, bring this regime down in Kiev. And that is the only way to remove it, right? You can remove Zelensky, and as long as all of the opposition, real opposition parties in the country are still banned, and all the media is critical media is banned, and Russians aren't allowed to speak, Russian ethnics and Russian speakers in Ukraine aren't allowed to speak Russian or worship even at the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, then it's still a Banderite fascist regime. And any elections that it holds can only result in another Banderite fascist, that of the Maidan Malu, right? So there's still no change of regime. And ultimately, Russia's security, this is just going to have to be fought again in the future if it's not finished now. So Trump knows that, right? I acknowledge Trump hates the European leaders on a personal level. I think he has nothing but contempt for Zelensky and Yermak and his crew. He doesn't much care about Ukraine per se, but he is still the U.S. president. That is a U.S. proxy regime. And ultimately, what he is doing is trying to preserve that regime in some form into the future. Russia, meanwhile, is trying to use a brief window of opportunity for at least a temporary improvement of relations with the U.S. It may only last 4 years, if that, or, because no one knows what's going to happen in elections in 4 years in the U.S. Right? Too much depends on the economy and other things, right? But ultimately, they know that these negotiations are probably not going to go anywhere. And even if they did, that's not good for Russia. Russia does not want peace except on their terms. And let's be honest, there is no real way to ever get the Kiev regime, right, to follow denazification, demilitarization, and, forever forswearing NATO without changing the regime. It's just not possible.
Okay, that's unfortunate. Like, the reason why I said it's unfortunate is because, look, I'm one of those people that want the war to end. I want it to end sustainably.
I only want it to end when it's done. And it's far away from done.
But I don't want it to be something where, okay, in 10 years, we're in another, at odds with the U.S. over this proxy regime.
It will. Unless this regime is taken care of for now, there will be another conflict at the very least as soon as another Democrat or another neocon Republican is sitting in the White House, if not before then. Which is why not only do I not think there is any viability for a successful, peaceful settlement of this conflict now or in the short-term future, I think it is extremely undesirable to Russia's interests and national security for any deal that would keep a Western-leaning Banderite fascist putsch regime in Kiev.
That means that Moscow will have to go to Kiev.
Yeah. Maybe further.
But see, they don't want to go further. Like
they don't, but there's no other good option. They don't want to, but they have to. Right? I didn't want to at the beginning of this conflict.
Right.
Going into Western Ukraine at the beginning of this conflict, I thought was suicidal. But at this point, it is the least bad option because the only alternative is a permanent anti-Russian militarist state with all of its children indoctrinated to be future warriors against Russia. Zelensky has a picture of the burning Kremlin right outside of his office, right? And try to find me another more sane person than him within the Maidan regime, within the Rada, try to find me someone that is actually Zaluzhny. He had 2 busts of Stepan Bandera in his military office, the big red and black flag, and the bust of Shukovich. There's no one more sane.
But that also means politically, Donald Trump has no one to work with in Ukraine.
Yes, he's looking at Yulia Tymoshenko, the gas princess, this old snake, right, brought out of a veritable political extinction, right? That's who the U.S. is, partly because she's presenting herself. She somehow finagled an invitation to Trump's inauguration, and she's being tossed around. That's whom they would like to see, right? And there's kind of a clear thing, right, where at some point Zelensky will agree to step down, theoretically, and Tymoshenko, who is a sitting MP, could then be declared Speaker of the Rada, right, by agreement from everyone. And then she would automatically become president if Zelensky steps down without the need for elections. But is that going to be, is Yulia Tymoshenko, right, the captured princess of the Maidan, going to be any better for Russia in the long term? No, because she's still going to be in charge of a Banderite fascist regime. Right? Poroshenko was an oligarch, right? An political insider and a candy oligarch, right? But he became a fire-breathing West Ukrainian nationalist and Banderite by the end of his administration. Zelensky was a Jewish ethnic comedian from Krivoy Rog, right? And he has internalized all of this and now has pictures of a burning Kremlin outside of his office because the Maidan regime is undergirded. Its entire, mental infrastructure is built on Banderism, Banderite fascism. And until that regime in its entirety is swept out, any new figurehead, right, be it Poroshenko or Zelensky or Yulia Tymoshenko, or, I mean, Zelensky is already a Banderite fascist, but anyone you put in will inevitably, internalize, become a part of that, because that is what is the nature of the regime that they inherit. So
Wow.
you can't have free and fair elections in Ukraine. You can't have a change of political power to get rid of this Maidan regime. I don't know how to do it without an occupation of Kiev in one form or another, right? I mean, maybe the military will have melted away, but until you can completely, someone else steps in and completely says, all these banned political parties, all these people representing the views of the people of East Ukraine, all these restrictions on language and culture and religion, all of these things that are supposedly European values, right, are upheld. Until you can force that, right, on Ukraine, then nothing will ultimately change. And I don't know how to do that.
And any deal that Trump makes saves them.
Yes, it saves them. Any deal he gets saves them. It doesn't remove them, it saves them. Yeah, you might get Zelensky out, and another person will just rise up out of the regime, right? This regime has solidified, from 2014 to 2022, right? I always said from the whole time that it was a mistake to let it solidify, but it is now in complete control of the body politic of Ukraine. Even if it is a cancer, even if most Ukrainians don't necessarily agree with it, there is no way to get it to release its hold. It's like an alien, right? From the franchise, stuck in the chest. You can't get that thing out of the person's body without cutting the body open and killing them in the process.
One last question. I would imagine Trump knows that these guys are far-right neo-Nazis. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I don't know if he cares.
I don't think he understands the degree. I don't think he understands.
Okay. If that's true, and if indeed that's the case, any guy and any person that he gets on some level is going to have to be able to sign a document saying, I want this war to end. And it has been said that anybody who signs that document is going to have to deal with the neo-Nazi with a gun. Sure. Pointing directly at his head, saying, "I will blow your head off." If anyone actually did that,
they would definitely turn on them. There would be a civil war within the Maidan regime, which that would be great for Russia. That is, another possibility for. But in the end, at the end of that, Russian forces would have to go back in eventually, anyway, right? To clean up.
That's my point, right? Like anybody that Trump gets to sign a document has to be done in a context where those neo-Nazis are either under leash or are gone.
How do you leash? You can't leash ideological hatred like that.
Right? And I guess that's kind of my point, right? Does it mean that if they get a deal, those people are not there in the context of a deal because they can't be there because you can't get a deal if they're there?
It's
meaning for Trump to get what he wants. Those neo-Nazis can't be a part of the government of Ukraine because I believe you're right.
They are a part of the government. They're all through the government. They're all through the RADA, the security services, the all of the institutions of power, the police, right? You can't get rid of them unless you bring the whole thing down. Jesus. It's a catch-22, right? This is the monster that was created, right? They do not represent the majority of Ukrainian people, but sometimes, right? Gramsci talked about this, a political minority that has all, the passion, the anger, and the willingness to use force can seize control of a much larger population to the degree that we see in Ukraine, right? Mm-hmm. This is that is fascist revolution 101, right? They have effectively done that in Ukraine, and there's no good way to get them out. There's no happy ending to this. Yeah. There's only less bad options for everyone involved.
Well, them going is the most ideal. Let's put it
Yeah,
that way.
but imagine the amount of bloodshed that will be necessary to remove them by force. And that's the only way to get rid of them.
There's no political out.
I can't see one kid. Mearsheimer can't see one.
Yeah.
I can't see one. I would love. I would prefer. How do you stop Nazis from being Nazis, right? How do you stop Jelani in Syria from being ISIS and a jihadist, right? Oh, that jihadism, that Banderite fascism, that was just a teenage phase. Like I was some teenage goth girl, right? I can get over that. Okay, right, whatever.
Yeah. You just chop heads. Yeah, I just chopped heads in my youth. I don't do it now. Yeah, that's kind of hard to get be on a head chopper. Mark, man, I always appreciate these conversations. You're right. It's dark, but you're right. None of this has been love and light. These people have been killing and dying for 3 years.
Humpty Dumpty fell off a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the Empire's horses and all the Empire's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Ultimately, rip Ukraine, unfortunately, is the best of bad options.
Mark Sloboda, he's an international relations and security analyst. He's a good friend of the show. What he said, the black pill. You go to other people for the white pill, the black pill. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it, man. You be safe. Have a good one today.
You too.
All right. Look, I think Mark is right, unfortunately. You break an arm. How do you fix that broken arm? The doctor's going to come in. He's going to say, all right, we're going to count to 3. And on 3, we're going to pull it. And he says, 1, you close your eyes and pull it. Infinite pain. But that pain was necessary in order to set the broken arm, right? You have a bunch of Nazis who've been able to take over with the help of the United States in 2014, overthrowing the Yanukovych government in a bloody coup. They called it a revolution of dignity. It was not a revolution of dignity. It was a coup. Call it what it is. When the official leader of a country is deposed through force with a band of Nazis being a tip of the spear of the US government and doing so, that is a coup. They can call it whatever they want. And the catch becomes, okay, how do you get rid of these people who've taken all the political power and control of Ukraine and have driven it to this? I can show you the video of Arestovich where he pointed out Russia will be forced to invade because we are going to try to get into NATO, meaning they understood what was taking place and they did it anyway. Just astonishing loss of life resulting from it. Shout out to Sloboda. Shout out to Sloboda. As he said, you can get the white pill anywhere you go. If you want the black pill, you come to me. You come to me. Before KJ comes on, KJ will be on in about 15 minutes. As I was in transit yesterday, a story pops up from the Atlantic, of all places. And the author of the story recounts how he was apparently on a phone list of Hegeseth and Waltz as they were talking about bombing Yemen right here. Effectively, the war plans of this murderous campaign in Yemen was texted to a journalist in the Atlantic. He writes this, including with apparently screenshots of the conversations as they were taking place. He even gives the time frames for these conversations. And he is even shocked at one point, thinking to himself, okay, maybe this isn't who they say it is. Maybe this is somebody pretending to be Hegeseth. Come to find out, it was not somebody pretending. It was indeed the war plans that were going into Yemen. These things were accidentally leaked or sent to him in advance of the attack on the Houthis. Hegeseth, when being confronted about this, outright just lies. He just lies. Lies so bad that the community notes even point out, this is not true. He's making this up. I'm going to show you Hegeseth's response to the leak of text messages to this journalist at the Atlantic. They sent it via signal. And the journalist was somewhat shocked, like, holy shit, they just sent me war plans. They just sent me war plans. This is Hegseth's response when it is outed that he accidentally sent national security secrets of war to a journalist.
Can you share how your information about war plans against the Houthis in Yemen was shared with a journalist in the Atlantic? And were those details classified?
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage. This is what he does. I would love to comment on the Houthi campaign because of the skill and courage of our troops. I've monitored it very closely from the beginning. And you see, we've been managing 4 years of deferred maintenance under the Trump administration. Our troops, our sailors were getting shot at as targets. Our ships couldn't sail through. And when they did shoot back, it was purely defensively or at shacks in Yemen.
By the way, all of this is a lie by Hegseth. Everything that he like, the notion that this is, in fact, just to be clear on how ludicrous what Hegseth is saying is, the community notes came out under that video, that very same video, and pointed out that everything he's saying is lying. The Houthis were shooting at U.S. ships. They had no issue. The reason that the aircraft carriers moved away is because they're concerned that the Houthis was going to shoot at them under Joe Biden and under Trump. The community notes came out misleading. Atlantic included screenshots from the signal chat. White House confirmed the issue. House Speaker Mike Johnson confirmed it. National Security Council confirmed it. NSC confirmed it to Fox News, meaning all of these organizations confirm that the text messages from Signal that came from Hegseth were accurate. They were true. The article is out where you can read it yourself right here. He is lying. Hegseth is lying. It is disturbing that the Secretary of Defense, well above his skis, by the way, for that job, will come out, will mess up, will lie, and everybody around him says he is lying. He is lying. Now, this is pretty outrageous. Look, there is an inherent problem with people in power lying, even though they do it all the time. You're put in a position of the public's trust, where the public needs to believe what you're saying because the stakes of what is happening are so high. You are literally using U.S. armaments to bomb another country, a country that hasn't attacked us, by the way, but bomb another country. And yes, Red Sea shipping, I get all that. But Trump got in office under this idea that I'm going to end wars, not start them. And now he is bombing another country, and I would argue bombing them on behalf of Israel, a foreign agent. And when I'm saying he's bombing on behalf of Israel, the Houthis are doing what they're doing because from their point of view, we are standing up for Gaza. We're trying to stop a genocide, and we're trying to stop a genocide by using the power at our disposal. Okay, that power is minimum, but it is a power that we're going to use to do so. The Houthis have been bombed for over a decade. It is not in any way inhibited, stop their action or their point of view. Their point of view. It is a poor choice. It is a poor look. You can stop the Houthis from doing it by just honoring the deal that you made with Hamas. Just that. And the point that I'm making with honoring the deal that you made with Hamas, Israel has been violating that deal from the moment that they initiated that deal. They violated that deal because they know that the United States is not going to call them on the fact that they're violating the deal. And so they violate the deal. Hamas he even got to the point of saying, look, we will step back from government if you implement the second phase of the deal. Israel didn't care. They didn't care because they knew they didn't have to care. The Houthis, from their point of view, okay, we're doing what we're doing in order to get a deal. Okay, so if you indeed are the deal maker, if you indeed came in under this notion that we made a deal with Hamas in order to end the fighting, Hamas and Israel, then just stick with the deal. Push Israel to stick with the deal. Trump's problem is that even in the situation of Ukraine, where he actually wants an agreement, he wants the war to end, he is still not pushing his proxy to attend to the deal. So if you can't even do it in a conflict that you want, what does it mean for a conflict that you're ambivalent about and that you're clearly on the side of Israel on? Like, I don't think, well, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, maybe he doesn't care. All of these things people are paying attention to. Every world leader around the world, around the planet, are looking and saying, is Donald Trump, who they already think is a flagrant liar, which he is, but is Donald Trump going to be willing to honor any agreement that Donald Trump makes? He's pulled out of the JCPOA. He's pulled out of all these nuclear agreements and missile agreements with Russia. Ukraine is violating the ceasefire as we speak. No word, no mention by Donald Trump. Maybe he doesn't want to do it because it's humiliating to do so. No word, no mention of it by Donald Trump. The Russians see it. The Russians see it. And you are engaged in a 12-hour deal to get a Black Sea grain deal reinitiated that you have violated twice. And you want them to do a third, while you can't even deal with the agreements that are active as we speak in Israel and, for that matter, in Ukraine. Good luck with the grain deal. Good luck with the grain deal, considering you can't honor the other agreements. I'm saying the attacks on the Houthis, A, betrays what Donald Trump said he was going to do when he got in office. There's that. Two, they're unproductive. And if the Houthis hit the jackpot and accidentally or intentionally sink a carrier or hit a carrier, you will have serious explaining to do to the families of the people who were killed, regardless of the actions that you take after. Unless Donald Trump is talking about a land invasion, he is limited in scope of how he can hit the Houthis, considering they've been getting hit for the last 10 years or more. They're still attacking if they need to. This is not a way to go about it. This approach by the Trump administration that believes they need to be Herculean in every negotiation they get involved in. Well, I'm sorry, you have no leverage in the Russian situation. You may have leverage with sanctions or those type of things, but militarily speaking, you're limited in what you can do. In the Houthi situation, you're also militarily limited. And so if the objective is to stop the Houthis from doing this, you can do that by tending to the deal with Israel. If the objective is, I need to be strong, and I need to be a strong man and dictate, you're not going to be able to do it. You're going to fail every bit as much as Joe Biden failed. And the problem with this is, if you have openly stated, we are going to stop the Houthis from doing this, and just like Joe Biden came out with, we are going to stop the Houthis from doing this, and the humiliation for the Biden administration when the Houthis were still firing shots at the Red Sea, regardless of the mighty U.S. and its $1 trillion military. Okay, well, you look just as incompetent and weak as Joe Biden. You do. If at the end of this bombing raid, the Houthis are still firing shots into the Red Sea, you look as weak and as incompetent and as Joe Biden. And it's even worse because you're taking the position of a strong man, where Joe Biden was this geriatric, person who fell asleep on the beach. You will look just as bad. And I'm saying he will look just as bad. You can call it a prognostication. I would just call it recent history that we've already lived. We've done this. It failed. You're doing no different. It will fail. What it seems is that the tools that the U.S. has at its disposal has gotten less and less and less. And Mark is right. I think Donald Trump wants to carve the world up into three parts. Russia, sphere of influence. China, sphere of influence. U.S., sphere sphere of influence, and we will be king in our domain. Sad day for you, Canada. Sad day for you, Greenland. Sad day for you, Panama Canal. But then the question becomes, okay, well, how do you affect this? Are you going to militarily take Greenland? Are you going to militarily take Canada? Because I don't think they want to go, nor do I think that they're going to be on board for this idea of being the quote unquote 51st state. You're putting out plans and ideas that the capability of accomplishing them is minimum. And to make it even worse, you were not elected for it. The American public didn't elect you to be a conquistador, to go marching into Canada in order to change or somehow make Canada a 51st state, nor did they bring you in for you to militarily attack and take Greenland? Seriously? You really believe that the American public say, yeah, we're going to elect Donald Trump to take Greenland, or for that matter, to change the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America? All of this stuff is theatrics. And over again, as I look at Donald Trump's administration, it looks like they just fundamentally missed the point. I felt that way about Democrats also, but I feel that way deeply about the Trump administration. Who hired you to attack Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid? Who hired you to attack the Houthis on behalf of a foreign government? Who hired you to bring in or to deport? They may not be Americans, but they're here legally. Who hired you to do that? All of this stuff comes across as theatrics from a government that has no capability in doing what they actually hired you for. It's almost as if they hired me to be a cleaning person. I'm like, hey, this place is so disgusting. I'm just going to do this other stuff. And hopefully, as they see me dance as I do this other stuff, that they would ignore the fact that they hired me as a janitor. It feels like that. The notion that you bring in Elon Musk, okay, yeah, waste, fraud, and abuse. The American public would accept that on some level if you were actually going after waste, fraud, and abuse as opposed to destroying those organizations. Why would anybody believe that Elon Musk, a billionaire from South Africa, has any knowledge or understanding on how Medicaid, Social Security, or for that matter, Medicare works? Why would anybody believe that? And that within the course of a few days, hey, we found all of these people we could fire. Hey, we found all this stuff that we could do. Hey, why would people believe that these complicated governmental systems will give way and yield its understanding in a few days to somebody who has no understanding of those things? I will tell you, as a software engineer, the first day that you go into a building or business, you have no understanding of that system. You know nothing about the system. Anything that you do would be a detriment to that system because typically those systems are so magnificently complicated. The functions, the subsystems, the widgets, the things that they didn't build into the system, but they have working on the side because they didn't have time as a company to actually incorporate those things into the system. All of that stuff makes up a company. And you can imagine something as complicated as Social Security is not going to lend itself, its knowledge, its information, its inner workings, to somebody like Elon Musk over the course of a day. I'm saying that is true for all of those governmental systems. And I'm saying that is true for all of the things that Musk, Trump have been doing on short notice, where they've just, we're going to fire all these people. Oh, that's not going to have a negative effect at all. They're just waste, fraud, and abuse. And I know that because I'm super brilliant and I can just look at it and tell. It's nonsense. I'm saying the entire administration has functioned on what seemingly has been a circus. Yeah, they're going through negotiations in the context of Russia, but they spent 12 hours and got bupkis. They're talking, that's good. But it just comes across as a clown show. Domestically, definitely. And it comes across as a clown dancing to make you ignore the chaos that they're effectively creating as they dance and as they don't do the job that they were hired to actually do. Just astonishing. I want to go to my guest, though. I am joined by the man himself, KJ No. He is a great friend of this show. I always enjoy talking to him. I love what comes out of his mouth. KJ is a journalist, political analyst, and writer and teacher specializing in the geopolitiks of the Asia-Pacific region. He was a contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. And one more thing, KJ, where can people find you? I'm starting this first because I realized that if people don't stay to the very end of the interview, or if I break the interview up, did they miss that part? Where can
Yeah,
people find you, KJ?
they can find me on the Breakthrough News Network. I co-host a show called The China Report.
Excellent. And look, KJ, people have loved you when you've come on this show. They've enjoyed the commentary, the content, the point of view that you espouse. And so, look, I want to thank you for being one of my guests on these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I have to start at South Korea. You sent me a link and you pointed out US elites want South Korea to be a dictatorship for democracy. I love that. Dictatorship for democracy. Go into that. Explain what you mean by that.
Yes. I mean, it's not something that I made up. It's actually what a high-ranking former U.S. Official has said. This is Morse Tan. He was a former ambassador at large for the U.S. State Department. And for those of you who don't know what an ambassador at large is, it's almost like a viceroy in the U.S. State Department. You know, people like Averell Harriman, Henry Cabot Lodge, Paul Nitze, Paul Bremer, Strobe Talbot, you know, these kinds of people. So they're really, really powerful diplomats in the State Department. And he was recently in Korea at a rally, and he said, President Yoon, this is the South Korean president who recently declared martial law. He said that Yoon declared martial law to preserve South Korea's democracy. Okay. In other words, he's saying that Yoon made himself military dictator because he was going to preserve democracy. Okay, so this is kind of absurd. But what I'm trying to say is that this is the kind of discourse that's coming out of Washington. This is what they're either saying explicitly through people like Morse Tan, you know, who's a former official, but this is likely what they're thinking amongst themselves. And Tan also, what he said is that, so Yoon Suk-yeol has been charged with insurrection. Why? Because he tried to overthrow the constitutional order of South Korea. Why? Because in the middle of the night when people were going to bed, he suddenly, out of the blue, declared that the country was a military dictatorship, that he was declaring martial law. And he's on television saying this, and then he sent troops to prevent the lawmakers from voting it down. And there's sworn testimony that says that he told troops to shoot the lawmakers inside the parliament to prevent them from voting it down. So this is clearly something terribly illegal, and it is what the Koreans would call insurrection. It's treason, and therefore he's been charged with treason. But again, Morse Tan has said that the impeachment of Yoon Suk-yeol is an insurrection. And he says that it's led by the opposition party, Lee Jae-myung, who wants to turn the country over to Chinese communists. And so this is the level of absurdity that you're hearing on the South Korean right wing. But note that these talking points are being echoed by a very, very high-ranking U.S. Former State Department official. And so that gives you a sense of the way in which U.S. interests and South Korean right-wing interests are merging, but also the way in which U.S. interests are probably driving South Korea's protests.
You know what's ironic about this, KJ, is that they say the same thing about Trump in Russia, effectively saying, Witkoff is clearly a Putin agent, and he's working for Putin. And he's meaning there's an ironic parallel in the things that people say about the Trump administration trying to get a deal with Russia. And this idea of, okay, well, these guys going in democracy and impeaching a president that tried to declare martial law, well, obviously those people are working with the Chinese. It's like, okay, dude, not everything that is taking place purely because of your opponent. And it's just very bizarre in the way that this is breaking down. It's the same administration, but in one sense, the administration is being seen as, okay, well, you're clearly working for Putin and an agent of Putin. By the same token, that same administration that is being accused as being an agent of Putin is now accusing another government of being an agent of China. That is like, it's amazing how both of these things are coming out of the same government or being directed at the same government. What is going on with his case? He was let out of prison, but he's still being investigated. And let's break this up into two different ways. One, let's break it up into, okay, the US wants this guy in power in some way because they were backing a dictatorship, because they believed that dictatorship, A, was going to either provoke a war with North Korea or have it to be a pivot point to be working against Chinese interests. That seems to be where all of this is being placed, the US and its Asian pivot, and South Korea being one of the major countries that has in mind by the Asia pivot. But doesn't it mean on some level that if you had to declare a dictatorship, that they didn't trust the government of South Korea? Because I guess on some level, ostensibly, it's a democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to know about South Korea, that it was a military dictatorship or a fascist dictatorship for about half of its existence. It was created, South Korea was created by the United States, you know, the way that South Vietnam was created. It's an artificial construct. And it was created specifically to prevent Korea from going socialist. You see, after 1945, until 1945, Korea was a Japanese colony. After the Japanese lost, the Koreans built for themselves something called the Korean People's Republic, which was indigenous. Let me emphasize that point. It was an indigenous socialist state that was constituted out of 30,000 worker and peasant collectives. So they just, the moment the Japanese were out there, they went socialist, because that was the way that the entire country had been trending. I mean, the people who fought the Japanese were socialists, you know. So when that happened, the US realized we cannot let this happen. So, you know, with Russia taking, you know, trusteeship of the North, the US came into the trusteeship in the South. And in the South, they banned all the labor unions. They banned all the peasant collectives. They banned all the worker collectives. And then they said that, you know, we are going to put in our own little fascist, which they did. This guy was called Lee Syngman Rhee, and he started a genocide, and he wiped out all of those, you know, socialists. I mean, we estimate somewhere in the range from 300,000 to 1.2 million were killed. This is like Indonesia, what happened in Indonesia. And this was what was happening before the Korean War started. So you have to understand, South Korea was created by the US as a bulwark against indigenous socialism, and it was implemented through genocide, literal genocide. The longest mass grave in the world is in South Korea. It's 3 kilometers long, and they have 150 mass graves that have not been excavated. So this is a part of the history that people don't understand. It was literally created by genocide by the United States that wanted a bulwark against the spread of socialism in Asia. So, having said that, it has been a series of dictatorships, and it did not have an elected civilian government until 1993 under Kim Il-sung. Before then, it was, you know, fascist U.S. Puppet, fascist U.S. puppet, fascist U.S. puppet, and most of them were generals.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
yeah, but democracy sticks sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. So you know, the easiest configuration for the United States has always been to have a military dictatorship in South Korea. I mean, that's the thing that has been the most convenient for them. And these military dictatorships rendered so many favors for the United States. So, for example, during the Vietnam War, as the US was starting and proceeding with and losing the war, South Korea sent 340,000 troops to Vietnam. 340,000. They were the second largest deployment after the US itself. And after 1972, South Korean troops outnumbered American troops in Vietnam 2-1. And so you can see how convenient this quizzling is. But currently, South Korea has 3.6 million troops. That's the size of South Korea's military. It has 500,000 regular troops, incredibly trained, ready to go to war in an eye blink. It's that line that the Wolfpack has. They say, "We fight tonight." They're ready to start war immediately. And then you have another 3.1 million reserve troops that can be pulled up, at the drop of a switch. And that makes South Korea have the third largest military manpower in the world. It is larger than China and Russia combined. Okay, so this is the incredible force multiplier, force projection platform. And the thing to understand here is that South Korea's military falls under US operational control the moment the United States declares it. If they declare the magic words DEFCON 3, that means that the US gets all of South Korea's troops, all of South Korea's bases, all of South Korea's material and weapons. They all fall under the control of the United Forces Korea 4-star general. Okay, so that's the setup.
Just to intrude for a bit. I get the sense, though, that because South Korea may have a veto on that, if you have a strongman in, if you have a, let's say, like a quisling leader, okay, well, they send those troops. There's no question. Hell, those troops may even go to Ukraine, especially with this argument, oh, the North Korean troops in Ukraine, they just burned their faces just before death because, hashtag reasons. Okay, we have not seen that, but the very language of it, on some level, language dictates the context to which you function and operate. And so by them saying, oh, they're North Korean troops, okay, obviously, if they can get their hands on South Korea, especially in a losing war, they may want to send those South Korean troops into the breach. There's that. Two, they may not trust South Korea under the government to which they have. Like, it's one thing when it's under military dictatorship. It's a dictatorship. You do whatever you want. That is not the same thing, though, as having, let's say, a South Korean government that may question, okay, well, maybe we don't want to send our troops to Ukraine. Maybe we don't want to start a war with North Korea. Maybe we don't think China is the threat that you're effectively saying that China is, which breeds a certain amount of distrust in this idea of South Korea sending those 3 million troops. Does it make sense? Like, the issue that they may have is that they don't know that South Korea would actually do what they tell South Korea to do because they have a democratic government. And democratic governments are very difficult to work with because they are multiple of people and they may come up with a different assessment. Iran, really good example. When the US and Britain, when Iran started to say back in the 70s, I believe, yeah, maybe we need to use more of the money for our oil for our own domestic consumption. We have all this oil. We may make the lives of people in the country better. And the US and Britain were like, okay, that's a problem. They're coming up with ideas. Let's get rid of that government, in which case they put in their own dictator. So is that what we're looking at? That really a lot of this stuff boils down to the US is making an major pivot and they don't trust a South Korean government that may come up with a different assessment. And if you push it, may change the model to which they have operated for all of these years as being a quisling of the United States.
You're absolutely right. That is what was going on. So, once again, Barack Obama declared the pivot to Asia. The pivot to Asia, in its, clearest terms, was essentially a declaration of war against China. It was a plan to encircle China with bases, to choke it out. They drafted a plan of war called air-sea battle, literally a plan of war, a doctrine of war. And then they also had a plan of economic warfare called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. All of these things have been continued in one way or another, have been ratcheted up and escalated. So the plan since at least 2011 and really 2008, 2009 is essentially to escalate to war with China in order to make sure that the US system, the global hegemonic system where the US is the apex predator and sucks all the wealth out of the rest of the global South, as Pete Hegseth put it very nakedly, that system does not change, that nobody gets to run off the farm. Nobody gets to run off the plantation the way that China did. Everybody has to stay on the plantation with the US as the overseer and the controller of this entire global system, what they call full spectrum dominance and unipolar hegemony. Because China broke that mold, that's why the Obama administration decided that they had to go to war against China. So these plans have been building for over a decade. Now, the important piece again is South Korea is one of the key force projection platforms against China. As I said, it's because it has 3.6 million troops that fall on the drop of a hat under US control. It has the fifth most powerful military in the world, and it's right next to China. It's literally the on-ramp onto the Chinese continent. For 500 years, all seaborne invasions of China have started either from the Korean Peninsula or from Taiwan Island, and usually the two come in matched pairs, the two at the same time. And so Korea is incredibly important, but not simply Korea by itself, but the US created something called JACAS, the Japan-Korea-US Alliance. They turned them into this like tripartite military alliance, which is unthinkable. Remember, Japan colonized Korea for almost half a century. I mean, as far as the South Koreans are concerned, Japan is like Nazi Germany, cubed. It's just unthinkable.
Comfort women, if you remember. Like, what's his name? That goofball YouTuber.
Yeah.
That IRL streamer that is stuck in South Korea now, that was dancing with the comfort women that created that international incident where he's effectively stuck there and is going to be prosecuted. The comfort woman was directly from that war.
Exactly. That's what 200,000, 400,000 women taken into sexual slavery to serve Japanese troops. And, according to scholars, 3/4 of those women died during their enslavement. That's a death rate which is higher than frontline soldiers. Okay, wow. So that gives you a sense of the kind of history between Japan and Korea. But Yoon comes from a line of politicians that were Japanese collaborators during the colonization of Japan, of Korea. You see the same thing in Taiwan. There's a stream of politicians. Their families were collaborators with the Japanese. Taiwan was also a Japanese colony. In fact, the Chinese tried to prevent the Japanese from colonizing Korea. This is called the Sino-Japanese War. The Chinese lost this war, and as a result of this, the Japanese took Taiwan as war booty from that war, and that was also the beginning of the colonization of Korea. So coming back to bad blood, you have the comfort women. This is another thing that people don't understand. It wasn't just the comfort women; it was slave labor in general. The Japanese put millions of Koreans and took them into slave labor. They were taken to Japan as slave laborers. That's why when the atomic bomb went off in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, about 30% of the people killed were Koreans. What were the Koreans doing in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Well, they were working in the factories. They were slave labor. They were all killed and then or injured. And then after after the bombing, Japan surrendered, and it said, the Koreans, they're illegal aliens, and we're not going to treat them. And so you had, tens of thousands of Koreans who died because they couldn't get any medical treatment. So, the crimes just go on and on. I'm not exaggerating when I say that for Koreans and for most of Asians, the Japanese are the Nazis cubed. It's just they're Nazis on steroids. They took millions of Koreans and Chinese to Manchuria, to northern China. They worked them to death in these slave camps, And historians refer to this as the Manchurian Passage, because the death rates were comparable or even higher to the transatlantic slave trade. People compare it to the Belgian Congo, the number of Koreans and Chinese who were killed, because this is how Japan became big and powerful. It's the same reason why the US became big and powerful. It's the same reason why Portugal and the UK became big and powerful. It became big and powerful not simply because it had colonies, but it had colonies with slave labor. Okay, so that is the history between Korea and Japan. And Yoon has suddenly decided, on the prompting of the United States, that South Korea is going to create a military alliance with its former colonizer. It's like being forced to marry a rapist, right? It's something that's unthinkable for the vast majority of Koreans. That history is still living memory. It wasn't so far along that the Japanese actually colonized Korea. I speak a little bit of Japanese. Why? Because my parents spoke Japanese. Why? Because everybody in Korea under Japanese colonization was forced to speak Japanese and take on a Japanese name. So this is not old history. It's not ancient history.
Would the South Koreans do, and by the way, for people who want some kind of, background on Belgium and the Congo, King Leopold's Soliloquy by Mark Twain. Oh, it is fantastic. It is a disturbing book, because the entire book is King Leopold justifying enslavement of the Congo and a number of people being killed. Like at one point in the book, he's like, yeah, I understand that all of these, let's say 1 million people died over the course of, or the population declined by 25% in a few years, but we had to get the rubber. So, it's a wild book in the way that it's explaining it, but it is gruesome. And I guess my point is, if you're looking for a background to your point on this, that book would be it. Is South Korea okay with that? Meaning, is the South Korean population and the way that it's organized, are they on board for joining this military alliance that the US and Europe wants to set up against China?
No, not 1 ounce. As I said, it's like being forced to marry your rapist. It's unthinkable. And the fact that Yoon entered into this military alliance with Japan, with the rising sun flying on Korean soil or in Korean territorial waters, that is just unthinkable. And so that's why so many people were so opposed to Yoon. They were out in the streets just before he declared martial law. There were 100,000 people in the streets demanding his immediate resignation. But Yoon was determined to stay in power, and the US wanted Yoon in power because they need him to maintain this tripartite alliance, because they want him to be the kind of quisling or the subcontractor for US war against China. This escalation is very real. It's very concrete. There's a granularity to the military exercises. If you've been in the military, you say, this is not normal. You do not rehearse on this level unless you're preparing for it. Remember, just recently, a few weeks ago, there were 30 something people or 50 something, at least 31 people were injured when South Korean troops engaging in a US South Korean military drill bombed their own village. Right? 152 houses were destroyed. This was a live, live firebombing that the US was conducting with South Koreans, doing the actual bombing rehearsal. And it's realistic because, when you have a war, probably somewhere between 5 and 25% of all casualties are friendly fire casualties. So this is literally rehearsal for war. So they had a friendly fire incident because they were some live fire bombing of North Korea right near the border. And, the coordinates were entered wrong, according to them. And they ended up bombing a church and, destroying 152 houses in a village in South Korea. So, this is all to say it's very, very close. It's escalating to war. And the US wants to make sure that Yoon Suk-yeol, or at least a quisling comparable to him, stays in power so that they can continue this US, South Korea, Japan alliance and continue to Ukrainize the country so it can escalate to war and be the US proxy in Northeast Asia. So when Yoon declared martial law, you have to understand that he didn't simply declare martial law. He'd been planning this for months. But
Right.
when he did it, he had prepared to trigger a war with North Korea. They had been firing missiles and shells into disputed territory near the northern limit line. They had sent drones right towards Pyongyang. They had given orders, they were flying helicopters right up. These are high-flying helicopters. You never fly helicopters that high, but they were flying, Black Hawk helicopters right up against the northern limit line, high up, in the hopes that it would draw fire. And of course, I think I told you this before, when Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law, he also had plans, according to, his subordinates, he had plans to kill off, a large number of his opponents and then to blame it on North Korea. So this was martial law plus a false flag attack.
Do you think? Okay, so there are two thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
In one sense, that because South Korea has been a dictatorship for so long, I will tell you, in the West, most of us don't remember the Korean War. The Korean War. And we remember, from our point of view, North Korea and South Korea, forgetting the fact that there was a Korea and that there was a war that decided that this is going to be North and South. That may not be true, however, for people in the US that are war planners, and they may think to themselves, okay, well, this used to be a dictatorship. Let's just go back to dictatorship. Missing the point that the people didn't want to be in a dictatorship, right? And so those people effectively came out and said, no, this is not something that we actively want, which ironically may make their point about why they were trying to make it a dictatorship, because they can't necessarily control it now that they've had a taste of democracy. And they were like, hey, we're supposed to control our affairs. What do you mean you want to be a dictatorship? So there's this kind of odd dynamic of, okay, well, there used to be a dictatorship. What's the big deal in going back to that? It suits our best interests. Let's go that route. And the country's saying no. Also, in the upcoming elections, that party, Yoon's party, is going to lose miserably. I would imagine, considering that this stuff has been aired. And just because we don't know it here doesn't mean they're not talking about it in South Korea, about what Yoon was trying to do, what he wanted to do, what the implications were of him doing that. And even whispers of, hey, was there somebody else pushing this guy to do that? All of that stuff works against US, or let's say foreign power interests in regards to getting South Korea in a mindset for war against China. The second part to that, that stuff was taking place under the Biden administration. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think Trump wants, let's say, maybe competition with China. I don't know if he wants war with China. But you tell me, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being deluded by this notion of, okay, well, we'll lose that war, or at the very least the world will lose that war. There's no way to win it. Why would they have it? Give me your take on that. I don't get the sense that Donald Trump wants a great power war. In fact, I go further. The entire point of Donald Trump breaking the world up into spheres of influence on some level gets across that the US is not a hegemon in the way that it was, let's say, in the 1990s or 2000s. And that admittance, that experiential admittance, hints at China has its own sphere of influence. Europe, or let's say Russia, has its own sphere of influence. America has its own sphere of influence, which means we don't necessarily want a war. We do want to exert some level of control into what we consider a sphere of influence. And we do want to have a great power conflict in an economic sense in regards to some kind of tariff war as we divide up the world and figure out what the world looks like going forward. Give me your take on that. Do you disagree with that? And if so, why?
I don't have a good answer, Jamal, because it's very complex. People kind of break down US policy. It's simplistic, but they say, they're primacists and they're restrainers, and then they're prioritizers. Restrainers, just want to kind of, tend our own garden. prioritizers want to prioritize China. They want to pivot to China and drop Ukraine. And then there are primicists like the Biden, Obama administration that want global hegemony. These are the, total neocons. What is the Trump administration's policy? It's unclear because they're mixed messages. You have people like Hegseth, you have people like Rubio. These people are primicists. They look like primicists, and they are clearly anti-China. And they've spoken clearly and explicitly about having a division of labor so that they can go after China. Europe takes care of Russia, continues to bleed it out, and we will go after China. They're on record saying this explicitly. At the same time, Trump is a businessman, and I think you can make the argument that he wants to do business. He's transactional, but he wants to do business. And I've said that Trump is not anti-war, but he is against losing wars. And I think he's smart enough to know that starting a war with China would be an immediate losing proposition. There is no way you can win a war with China unless you go nuclear, and go nuclear really fast. And so I don't think that is on Trump's, dance card, but I don't know about the other people who, some of them are apocalyptic religious warriors. I mean, certainly, I think, Hegseth, seems to be in this crusader mindset. And there's a kind of eschatological, apocalyptic ideology that also drives them, that wants never to give up U.S. primacy. So that is kind of an ongoing question. And then the other point that I'll make, and, I'm going to make it, I'm not going to, make everybody's day, but, capitalism has been in crisis at least since the 1970s. And it's, been contorting itself left, right, and other, trying to create new markets and new models, but it's continually broken down. In 2008, the ruling class kind of gave up the ghost. They said capitalism is finished. This was Nicolas Sarkozy, and he said it's finished. We can't do anything more with it. But there is always something that capitalism does, and that is that it uses war to reset the economy. It's like, if you think of capitalism as your obese uncle, who just can't control their appetite, they're just greedy, they can't stop eating, and then they have a heart attack, right? And so then you have to administer, CPR. Well, the wall defibrillator that you use on your obese uncle, that wall defibrillator for capitalism is called war. And so this is how you, jumpstart and get the zombie running again. And so, war could be part of this, larger, structural logic. But let me go back to Yoon Suk-yeol, because you made a very good point, and it ties to whether war is possible or not. If the US does go to war with China, it will use proxies. It will use proxies, Japan, Korea with its 3.6 million troops. It will use Taiwan Island. It will use the Philippines. It will use every little proxy that it can draw up, including, a kind of Asian NATO, AUKUS, Australia. So, but Yoon, because of this gambit, this very, very high stakes gambit where he tried to make himself dictator, and this, wasn't successful, he was put into prison. They released him from prison, which is a very bad sign. Okay, they released him on a technicality. It took them, almost a month to kind of overcome his armed guards and take him into custody. And then the court said, oh, there's a technicality. You didn't calculate his time right, et cetera, et cetera. Just a minor technicality. They released him from prison. Right now, he's back in his bunker in the presidential, residence, surrounded by not merely armed guards, but armored weaponry, right? They have armored tanks and things like that in that compound. So he's back ensconced in his seat of power. The prosecution refused to appeal his release, which tells you how serious the prosecution is about prosecuting him. He used to be a former prosecutor. He was the prosecutor general. So that's actually his little army. Okay. And and so, but he has so thoroughly discredited himself. I think you're right that it's not likely that his party will win. So this is a problem because the U.S., when they had Yoon, it was like Christmas in Washington. It was early Christmas. It was champagne corks exploded. They called him our perfect partner. He was a walking wish fulfillment list. And Rahm Emanuel, Japanese ambassador, said, it's just a matter of institutionalizing what Yoon has put into place. All these belligerent escalations and all these, and the tripartite alliance, etc. And now that Yoon has thoroughly discredited himself and looks that there is a chance of him being impeached, and if he's impeached, there are 60 days for a new presidential election. And if that new presidential election happens, it will go to the opposition party chief, who is Lee Jae-myung. Lee Jae-myung ran against Yoon Suk-yeol, at a few years ago, and he almost beat Yoon Suk-yeol. And he hasn't gone away. And if there is a snap election, he will be the top candidate. He's 20 points higher than any other candidate who could run for presidency. And that snap election would go to the opposition. Now, guess what Lee Jae-myung's policy on China is.
Considering the reaction, I would imagine, meaning considering the reaction of we're taking over the government because the opposition is friends with China, I would imagine he has less hawkish policy towards China.
Yeah, he wants some modus vivendi. He wants to balance between China and the U.S.
And he should.
China's not going away. He wants good relations with China. And also, he's not a total American quisling.
Yeah.
He's not a complete puppet. Why? Let me tell you something about his life history. Okay, so the period that he was growing up, South Korea was very, very poor. Okay, and I know this because I lived through Korea during that period. When I was going to middle school, every year my classmates would drop out of school. Why would they drop out? Because they couldn't afford the tuition, right? How much was that tuition? It was about $10 every 3 months. They could not afford that. They could not afford $3 tuition a month. Okay, so they would drop out of school, and what would they do? They would go and start to work in factories. Now, if you're 12, 13, 14, and you start working in a factory, your life is essentially, pardon my French, fucked. Your life is over. It's like going into a brothel or a whorehouse. You're not going to come back from that.
Yeah.
And Lee Jae-myung is one of these people. He's when he was, I think, 12 or 11, he started working in a factory. Okay, started working in a sweatshop. And he spent his whole life working in sweatshops. If you look at him on video, you'll see that he doesn't use one of his arms. Why? Because his arm was mangled twice in machinery when he was working as a kid, working in a rubber factory, a plastic, manufacturing. I mean, these are small. These are small sweatshops. There's no safety, there's no lighting. The floor is slippery, and his arm was mangled twice, so he actually cannot use one of his arms. But, and so this is what sets him aside, is that even while he was working at a sweatshop, he studied. He took. He attended a night school after working, a 12, 14-hour day, went to a night school, and then he took the high school equivalency test, and he was accepted into law school. And then in law school, he aced his studies, and then he passed the bar, and he aced the bar. So he's he's not your average sweatshop worker who
Yeah.
most of them are dead by the age of 40 from cancer or industrial accidents. So from that point, he became a lawyer, kind of a labor lawyer, human rights lawyer, and then he ran for office, and then he became the mayor of a major city, and so on and so on. So he worked his way up the political ladder, but there's a very, very strong populist bent, if you will, simply because of his own, life experience.
Mhm. Yeah, it's hard to ignore that life experience. I mean,
And-
especially, oh man, wow. Yeah, I didn't know that. I mean, that's a hell of a difference.
Nobody tells you that. And then you think about Yoon Suk-yeol. This was a guy, descendant of Japanese collaborators, born with a silver spoon in his mouth, went to the top, prep schools, went to the top university, played his way through, his studies. Apparently, he's an incredibly great pool player. He's something of a pool shark, so where he's been putting his energy into, and then he failed the bar exam 9 times. Okay, failed.
Wait, did you
Yeah.
say 9?
Yeah.
times?
9, 8 or 9 times, but he just took the bar exam over and over and over again until finally he passed it. Okay, so we're looking at 2 very different people, Lee Jae-myung versus Yoon Suk-yeol. Silver spoon, every privilege, and still an academic dunce. Okay, then he became a prosecutor, and then he moved his way up, but he never had political office, and he never won an election in his life. All of a sudden, out of the blue, he wins the presidential election. Everybody's astonished. How did that happen? Well, there's a great deal of suspicion that whatever boosted him to the top were the people who benefited from boosting him to the top, which is the U.S. deep state. They wanted him. They gave him a spread on Foreign Affairs magazine. He said that I'll do everything you want me to do. And lo and behold, the next day he is the president of South Korea. So the U.S. wants Yoon Suk-yeol. They certainly do not want somebody like Lee Jae-myung. They want to make sure absolutely that nobody like Lee Jae-myung is anywhere near the presidency. Someone who's populist, who believes in the working class, who is friendly with China, and who might push back against U.S. influence. They don't want anybody like that. Okay, so now get this. This is what's happening right now. Yoon Suk-yeol has his trial in the Constitutional Court is finished, and the Constitutional Court is supposed to deliver a verdict on his impeachment, either uphold it or reject it. But they have to deliver that verdict fast, because it has already been 30 days since the trial has ended, and they've been endlessly hanging fire, and everybody's out in the streets wondering, what the hell? Why is the Constitutional Court not delivering its verdict? It's easy. This is an open and shut case. It's not like a corruption case where you have to find the evidence. He's on television declaring martial law. The evidence is right there. Did he send troops to prevent the legislators from voting it down? Yes, we have footage of the troops. We have footage of people fighting the troops, and then there's all this testimony that says that, he told us to shoot the legislators. And there's other testimony that says that, he was trying to trigger a war with Korea. So this is, clearly impeachable.
Yeah.
But the Constitutional is taking its good time. And the question is why, right? Well, this is the other piece of the equation is Lee Jae-myung, after he lost the election to Yoon Suk-yeol, his house was raided 400 times by the prosecutor's office. Okay, raided not
400 times.
400 times. They tore his place upside down 400 times. I mean, the guy was literally homeless, because every other day, they would, show up and, tear his house upside down. Okay. So finally, they found that he had done something that was illegal, that he had lied while he was campaigning, that he had told, this kind of like, little fib while he was campaigning. And because of that, the prosecution demanded that he be imprisoned. And he has received, a sentence of 1 year. Okay. Now, usually campaign, you fib on the campaign trail, in the US, it doesn't even register. It just, if you're lucky, it might affect your campaign, but usually doesn't register. And in Korea, if there is something like that, it's usually a small fine. It's about $800 fine. Okay. But the prosecution, remember, Yoon Suk-yeol used to be the prosecutor general. They tore him upside down and they asked for maximal punishment. And they got 1 year. They got a 1 year sentence. It's now being adjudicated in appeals. And the appellate court has to decide whether to uphold that sentence or not. If that sentence is upheld, and he has to serve time for it, then he is hit with a 10-year ban on political activity.
Oh, there it is. That's
Right?
why.
That's
why.
And they want, and there's been pressure for the Constitutional Court to delay its impeachment decision until Yoon's court case has been adjudicated by the appellate court. And this happens tomorrow, right?
See, KJ, this is why people check out. Because that's so old. Like, that's not even, grand chess. That is straightforward, right?
Yeah.
We need this guy to get jail time, so he is off the political circuit. By the way, they did the same thing with the Lula in Brazil. We need him in a cage. That guy's going to win. We need him in a cage. We need him to be off the political space so we have any chance to win. That is outrageous. And it is very shallow. Like, it is obvious that the guy is the number 2. It is obvious that they're trying Gorgescu in Romania, same thing. They've raided the guy's place. They tried to put him in prison. They tried to put him in a cage. All of this is taking place in a country that's supposed to be a democracy. Like, that's astonishing. Give me your...
Let me ask you a question, Jamal.
Please.
Who do you think is behind the delay of the release of, the impeachment decision?
I would imagine it has to be some kind of ally
Yes.
of you.
A very high-powered ally. And according to a political, Korean assembly member, his name is Park Son-on, and he's very, very tightly connected to the intelligence services. He was actually he was in the National Security Council. And he says that the United States is exerting pressure through diplomatic channels to align the impeachment date as close to Lee Jae-myung's sentencing as possible. So this allegation has specifically been made, and he's hinted that it's the U.S. Ambassador himself, who has been, putting on this pressure. So, I mean, this is not a surprise, right? I mean, as you said, it's a global phenomenon, and it's like this, it's like, if you look in the night sky, sometimes you'll see Mars go retrograde or Mercury go retrograde. And if you have the notion that you are the center of your political motion, that you are the center of political gravity, then those retrograde motions won't make any sense. But if you understand that there is a much, much more powerful gravitational force, namely the sun, around which all these other planets circle, then those retrograde movements, those strange movements start to make sense.
Mm-hmm.
That center, that sun, that centrifugal force that guides all the other movements is the United States in Korea. The U.S.,
Yeah.
is the central gravitational force that determines, how these planetary bodies, political bodies move. And when you see these strange movements, you just have to switch the focus and understand, oh, okay, that's what's happening. This is, that's the gravitational force that's working here.
You're speaking astrology to me, KJ. Pluto, it's a planet I always look for in an astrological chart. Just saying. But you're right. The sun, the US is still this hegemon of sorts. Even if it's degrading, it's still there. It's still exerting influence. Fascinating. KJ, man, thank you for this. I always appreciate these conversations. My audience loves you to death. That last video that we did, they loved it. I mean, like through the moon comments saying, oh my God, we love KJ. KJ is fantastic. Thank you for this, KJ.
Thank
Fantastic explanation.
Always,
KJ, no.
always,
I'm sorry.
yeah, always a pleasure to be on your show, and always a pleasure to present to your listeners who are fantastic.
No, your explanations are logical, fantastic, and more in depth in a way that you would ever get out of typical mainstream media, who just glosses over much of the stuff. Like if you're looking at mainstream media, everybody's a villain, everybody's a bad guy. The U.S. is love and light. We just want justice around the world. We just believe in freedom. None of this stuff is true. Like this stuff is nonsense. Like the story that you pointed out about how we created a fascist state. Okay, most Americans don't know that. Like, and by the way, same thing in South America with the kill squads. Most Americans don't know that. The dictatorship we set up in Iran, most Americans don't know that. Like, it's fascinating to me how much our media effectively leaves out and glosses over in order to come up with this narrative. Just so the audience knows, KJ Noah is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specialized in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He's a contributor to the book, Capitalism on a Ventilator. Once censored by Amazon, it is now available at IA Center. Also, KJ, where else can people find you, just so they know?
They can find me on the China Report, which is on YouTube, and that's part of the Breakthrough News Network.
Fantastic. Breakthrough News. What's his name is on that? Oh God, Eugene Perrier, right?
Absolutely.
Eugene used to work at the network. He's awesome. He's awesome.
Definitely.
Thank you for this, KJ. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. KJ, the man himself, he is fantastic. We've come to the end. We've come to the end. End of another one. Show 120. We are growing. I appreciate all of you for helping in the growth of this channel. There have been shocking numbers on some of those videos from last week and the week before. I want to keep those numbers up. So definitely stay with me as we go about it. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share. Oh, by the way, we have chats. RG Beans, new member. Welcome to the family, RG. Welcome to the family. Welcome to the family. Mr. Ripley Hegseth is this Hegseth guy seems like he's not altogether there. Flagrant liar, if nothing else. Like, there's a joke by Eddie Murphy where he's talking about hooking up with another woman, like he's having sex with the woman, and his wife walks in. And his wife is like freaking out. Oh my God, I can't believe you're cheating on me. And Eddie Murphy comes out and is like, I didn't cheat on you. And she's like, but you're having sex with her. And he's standing there neck. I didn't cheat on you. It didn't happen. Never happened. It's like, it's that, right? It's the guy's like, I know my penis is out. I know she's in the bed, but I wasn't cheating on you. That's Hegseth in that statement of, it wasn't me, I didn't do it. And they're showing all of the evidence, and all of these people in the government are saying, yes, it happened. He did it. It happened. And Hegseth, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. Okay, bro, it was you. Mr. Ripley, I know for a fact the Atlantic's not all there. Again, fair enough. They're all together there on this one. Hegseth is lying through his teeth. They clearly released that information, leaked that data, and leaked that information. One thing. I like Red Fox too. In fact, my mom and I used to sit at the doctor's office to listen to Red Fox and Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor is the funniest man to have ever lived, with the exception of maybe David Chappelle. I don't know which. I don't know which. If before Chappelle came along, I would have said Richard Pryor. Dave Chappelle is a phenomenon. He is on another level. He is on another level. Okay, I'll end this. I had another video that I wanted to play, but we are 30 minutes beyond when the show was supposed to end. So I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like, share, subscribe. I have to go and find another light. So I may be a bit late cutting the clips for the day. I don't know where store is. I'll find one. You guys have a fantastic day. Like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you guys later. Signing off.